still is working. Hopefully, and hopefully that's better because I have done what I needed to do normally to up things up. So hopefully that's all working. And hopefully that's popped back into the same slot. If it hasn't, we've got fun, and I'll be trying to do some pruning. Back up. Well, hey. Twitch is okay, because it'll definitely pop back in Twitch, but it's a case of what's it done with the YouTube? It hopefully has saved the questions. I was very careful with the various things on our system, so hopefully it saved the questions. Let's check the settings of this one. Go live. Oh. See, that's working. And check the monetization settings to make sure it hasn't gone on to a massive, thing. Let's hope that works. Hello, everyone. It seems to have picked up the chat. I'll check with Discord and see if it retained the questions. It should still be live. And stick that up. And then go to Discord. Into the Q&A folder. Sorry, sorting this all out. It was okay, but as I said, I wasn't expecting to be having a chat with so many people this morning. Okay, so questions are now open, but it does appear to have lost the questions which we've already put in. Sorry about that. If you've got questions, please add them in. William Spencer, dare I say the best modern destroyer force probably consists of a high-low mix of Type 52L, Type 55, and Zumwalt hull to modernise the VLS in cells and some of the guns. That sounds like a terrible mix. Because I don't know where you think the Type 52 DL and Type 55 are a high-low mix. That's a high mix. There is nothing low about any of those. I mean that in the nicest possible way. You start off with going a high, mid, low mix of none of those are high, none of those are mid, and none of those are low. They're all high. I get where you're going from, but then the ships you selected are all high-end ones, my friend. That's not a high. That's a high mix. I'm definitely competing for world #1 status, or trying to. The mix. That's there is nothing there which is which is low. I was reading up to thinking, oh, this is going to be interesting. Let's see what they're going to put in. And it's a high mix. I'm going, no, that's not a high, mid, low, mate. I'm sorry. It just is. Oh, it's a. I can see where you're coming from, but that's not that. Those ones are not that. Those ones are not. I'm sorry, they're not. Oh. The 52DL is not even economy size, Carl von Gasberg. Nice way, if you're going for an economy size destroyer, you might want to look at a Type 45s on a Hobarts. That's economy sized. It's a fun one. It really is, but yeah. Oh. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing so much, but I just want to make sure that you have gone for high in every. They're not bad chips to be picking. I'm not arguing about that. I'm just going that they're a high, mid, low mix. Oh, that's kind of like going, I'm just thinking of all the Ali Burke deliberate derivatives out there. Sejong the Great, Maya, and Ali Burks as my high, mid, low mix. Really? You've gone for that lot? Yeah. Besides Wildfang, what are your other favourite destroyer names? Oh, there's going to be a few of them today. Now, I won't let you give you all a guess, but just think, knowing me, which destroyer is going to be illustrating for the 1930s generation destroyer types. Just predicting this before I get into it, because there are people going to go, I'm so surprised you picked those. No, I picked the ones to illustrate. Okay, so here's a base point discussion. For the beginning period we're going to get into, what is a destroyer for? What is a destroyer about? This is Greyhound. Launched 1900, commissioned 1902. Roughly 400 tons. So for those thinking that commissioning time takes so long because ships are so big these days, and if we go for smaller ships, they're going to be quicker to commission. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But the reality is, no. You can speed up commissioning, but that's when you have a lot of crew available to do a lot of tests very, very quickly. And usually you only get that kind of service and system set up during a major war. Because it's a lot of money to push ships through quickly. And if you're not doing it for a large volume of ships, it really doesn't make sense. From an economic or an infrastructure use perspective. So basically, destroyers are supposed to be able to act as the shield and spear for a fleet. Okay? A frigate is far more of a shield. Frigate always has been far more of a shield. So if we look at their history, frigates were the anti-submarine warfare assets. Before that, it was sloops, which were anti-submarine warfare, anti-mine warfare, all those things. Those were always far more defensive assets. Destroyers were shields and spears. So they have to be a balanced weapon system that's able to attack targets as well as defend against threats, okay? So we're always looking for something which is, okay, a balanced asset. It's automatically not an ideal destroyer if it's so dominated one way, it can't do the other. If it's so spear-orientated, it can't do the shielding operation, then it's a torpedo boat, but on steroids. If it's got entirely guns and it's got no missiles, no torpedoes, nothing like that, then it's pretty much just orientated on being a shield. And Honestly, it's a flak frigate. Okay? So, that's the thing. There's nothing wrong with being a flak frigate. If you've ever heard me talking on build charts, you'll have heard me talking about the Type 31s and referring to them as flak frigates, because they honestly are. Look at them. Look at their gun layout. Look at what they are for. They are flak frigates. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, again, you can always tell. This is one of the fun things. Someone said, "Oh yes, you must download your PowerPoint slides from somewhere." And I go, "Yeah, they wouldn't. If I was downloading from somewhere, I wouldn't be expecting the amount of spelling mistakes I make in making them, would they?" Did love though. The place they gave us that said I was downloading my PowerPoint slides from was on my Patreon. For some reason, they hadn't connected the two together, despite both being labelled as Dr. Alex Clarke. No idea why. Ah, caramba. Some people are fun. Some people are fun. So, the Greyhound is a pretty good one, because she's capable of doing 30 knots. And roughly 30 knots does seem to be about where destroyers hang around. They pump up and down, depending on the time period a bit, but they're usually hanging around to 30 knots as a top speed. And, well, roughly 400 tons. It's an all-rounder. Okay. The Greyhound is an absolute all-rounder. And if you consider what they're talking about at the time, in terms of ships, and she is sometimes labelled as HMS Greyhound, HMS Greyhound 1900, but as I said, she doesn't get commissioned until 1902. If you look at what people are talking about at the time, what they want these ships for, they're looking at the Juno Coal, they're looking at the people who are obsessing over torpedo boats, they're looking at other threats, and they're also looking at the ships they're operating with. When she comes out, the average speed of your battle fleet in battle formation is about 17 knots. So able to do 30 knots, she's got a 13 knot advantage over most fleets. In her own fleet, which is roughly 18 knots, she's got a 12 knot advantage. What does that mean for her in terms of being sword and shield? It means she can dive forward, and she can definitely overtake and engage her opponents and track them down. But also means she can do full maneuvers around. She can literally be doing circles around her fleet, protecting it. She's going fast enough, she can overtake. What's she armed with? She's armed with a 12-pounder, 5 6-pounders, and 2 18-inch torpedo tubes. That's the all-around weaponry of her time period, let's be honest. The 12-pounders and the 6-pounders, those are going to smash up any other destroyer or torpedo boat, aren't they? They are basically, they are a 3-inch, by the way, and a 76mm and 57mm. Again, just pointing this out, 76mm, 57mm. Though these guns do like to hang around. 12-pounders, AK 76mm, Otto Breda's 76, all these things. It's a good system for a defensive weaponry, which is going to take out. It's often one of those price points which works out. And again, there's this idea in modern warfare that price is something new. No. The problem is we keep trying to engage with the idea of it's the cost of the weapon, taking out the cost of the weapon. It's the cost of the weapon incoming versus the cost of the weapon you're engaging with. When actually the figure is the cost of the weapon that's coming in versus the cost of the weapon, the cost of what you would get destroyed if that weapon hit. That's what decides whether the cost of the intercept is economically viable. Because is it cheaper to buy a whole load of 3-inch shells or replace a whole warship? This is also the thing that comes up regularly when people tell me, no, we don't need more close-in weapon systems. We don't want more C-ram launchers or phalanxes on these ships. We don't need them. You only need one because they're expensive and they're complicated systems to put in. And I sit there and go, you're talking about a £600 million warship or a $1 billion warship or a $2 billion warship. If that gets damaged and is out of action, that's a big loss. Which would I rather do? Make sure I have enough close-in weapon systems so the ship doesn't have to turn for them to engage, but they're just ready there, so they get those so crucial extra seconds, even extra tenths of a second of engagement time. Or do I try and shortchange myself by saving the money? Now, yeah. I'm buying a close-in weapon system and being sensible. And laser-based systems are the coming systems, but they aren't in service yet. Now, part of that's funding. So it's stupidity on our part. Part of that is the fact that as good as they are, there are issues with them in terms of making sure you have the power generation, make sure you have the power storage, making sure you have the things which are got the infrastructure on board the ship, which is actually going to make them efficient to run and operate. The amount of people who think it's just turn on laser, plug it into power socket, and it's done. It's not. It's a lot more than that, sadly. Well, the other thing was, the interesting point was, back when the Houthis were doing all their stuff, that was the cost of how much these missiles are costing to intercept these drones. What happens if that drone hits a container ship or an oil tanker? How much money do we lose? A lot? Oh, well, then I know what I would prefer to deal with, frankly. I prefer that not to be my problem. I prefer to expend the missile. But yes. Greyhound. Now, as we go on into the Dreadnought era, you get a bit of a trouble. The battleships have grown up to 21 knots. And the point in this era, the reason why all three of these are British class vessels, is you go into that period of about 1905 to 1910. And you look at the sheer volume of destroyers being built by the British and the ships being built by everyone else. And you suddenly realise the reason why the British are here as your examples to look at and go from is because the British are literally outproducing everyone else in numbers. You also notice that at this point there is a sort of a standard developing in terms of the British ships, in that quite a lot of them have 3 stacks. Believe it or not, that's why the Americans end up with 4 stacks, so they have a stack superiority. Yes, it is that petty when it comes to naval design and status. They literally go, if you have 3 funnels, I must have 4, so I look better than you. I kid you not. But what we have interesting here is we have a class which were divided between triple expansion and turbine. We have a turbine class, and we have a triple expansion class. And we have a speed differential sort of going along in terms of these classes, in terms of what they are and how they work it out. Now, the fact is, the Royal Navy rather likes these ships. They liked the River class, especially the ones over here. They were good ships. But they were slow at 25.5 to 26.5 knots. And, as said, some of them had turbines, some didn't. But they were good ships. They were reliable ships. And then comes on the tribals, the ones in the middle. They are big ships for their time period. Between 860 and 940 tons, depending on the actual vessel. And 5 12-pounder guns, or 2 4-inch guns, plus some 12-pounders, and 18-inch torpedoes. Top speed of 33 knots. Yes, this thing could do 33 knots to track you down. That, by the way, is Cossack for her period. But as a sort of backup, you have Foxhound here from the Beagles, or G-class. And they are still turbines, but they're now 27 knots.
They've got a 4-inch gun, that's 102mm, 3 12-pounders, and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes. So the torpedoes have increased in size, and that thing's gone up in firepower. Let's be honest, a 4-inch and 3 3-inch guns. Now, why have they gone up in that firepower? Well, the other thing that you have affecting destroyer design in this period is their likelihood of bumping into counterparts has increased. They've gone from, we must kill torpedo boats, to, we have to kill each other now. Okay? How are you going to do that? Well, if I have a 4-inch shell that can probably punch through anywhere on one of these ships and really make a big hole, yes. And I got a lot of 3 inches so I can actually douse them in firepower. It's a fun thing to do. And it's a good capability to have. It really is. So you basically have low speed destroyer, middling speed destroyer, or low middling, high speed destroyer. Why are they doing this? Why are all these ships doing this? Because this period they're trying to work out how they're going to be the sword and shield of a ship fleet, which is based on 21-knot ships. And because 21 knots goes up, it goes up to 21 knots, what does the speed of the cruiser line go up to? The cruiser line increases to roughly 28 knots. Because usually the cruiser line is about a third faster than the battle line for reconnaissance. So when it was an 18-knot battle line, they had to be able to do 24 knots. Go and look at the cruiser time period. You'll find they're all comfortably able to do 24 knots. Once you've got your battle line going up to 21 knots, okay, now my battle line my cruiser line needs to go up to 28 knots. Okay, what happens if I have destroyers that scored in the cruiser line? If I have destroyers or the cruisers, they need to be able to go faster than that. Okay, well luckily you've got this one which can do 33 knots, but the rest of your fleet, do they really need to go 33 knots to be able to look after a 21-knot fleet? Probably not. Probably not. And that's the point to which you start to get problems generating up in terms of what a destroyer is for. Because once you start growing a ship in terms of its size and its power and its speed, then you start making compromises for, let's say, the speed. Can you carry the same firepower at the same speed? Do you need to do something with the hull? What stress are you putting the hull through? Again, this is an ongoing thing once we're talking about destroyers. There is going to be a balancing act being performed of what do they need to do versus what do they do. In this period, you have some good vessels. You have some good designs going through. But you don't really have a lot of construction going on. A lot of construction is going to wait till World War I and post-World War I, when there's going to be a huge amount of destroyers and vessels like them enter service. But the point is, in the meantime, it's we need to work out what we are going to build. We need to work it out. Pete Dawson, what would happen if the battle line went to 36 knots? Well, if the battle line managed to get to 36 knots, then you have a problem. Because theoretically, your cruiser line needs to get to 48 knots. If your cruiser line needs to get to 48 knots, then your destroyers are going to need an advantage on that of probably about 6 or so knots advantage on that. So you're probably looking at them having to go up to 54 knots. Let's put it this way. There's no surprise this could do 33 knots. Because if you take the battle line is now at 21 knots, the cruiser line is now at 28 knots, the destroyers can do 33 knots. They can push ahead in front of them. But also, to make ships that fast, you have to make compromises. Or it becomes incredibly expensive and incredibly large. And that's a problem. No one really wants to make those compromises. Lots of people need to make those compromises, but no one really wants to.
again, as I keep talking about it, we're going to see a lot of compromises start to enter in. But you don't get compromises much in this period because they've got the capabilities and they've got the power development of power coming in. If you remember how much power you're getting out of boilers at this point, and they haven't even got on to the really, really powerful thing. It's also worthwhile noting, it's often discussed, when does the Royal Navy start getting oil-fired boilers? The tribal class are oil-fired. They carry 200 tons of oil. So, again, this is my point usually about the Queen Elizabeth class, etc. When people are going, wow, it's so unexpected they go for this. No, the Royal Navy's been testing these designs. Again, the point is, it's a very conservative leap forward. Every single time. HMS Warrior is a conservative leap forward. Dreadnoughts are a conservative leap forward. Queen Elizabeth class are a conservative leap forward. They really are. So then we have the Lefaury class, and the Lefauries are possibly some of my favourite destroyers in the run-up to World War One. They are these gorgeous ships. They really are. And this is Let's. And Let's, well, ooh, she's a fun one. Yeah. She was built by Swan Hunter at Wallsend. She was laid down 6th of July 1912. She was launched 6th of June 1913 and commissioned October 1913. She was quite quickly through the process, but they're speeding up at this point. Again, steam turbines, but if you consider the Tribal class had 12,500 shaft horsepower. Lefaury class have 24,500 shaft horsepower. She's also 1,000 tons, roughly. The Tribals were between 860 and 940 tons. She can do 29 knots. She's got a range of over 1,700 nautical miles at 15 knots. She's got a complement of 74. She's armed with 3 4-inch guns, 2 1.5 pounders or 2 2-pounders anti-aircraft guns. So she's either got the pom-pom or the 37mm AA gun, and 2 twin 21-inch torpedo tubes. This is a big increase in firepower. Previous vessels were talking 18-inch torpedo tubes, i.e. 450 mils. This is a 533 mil torpedo tube. Why? Because the big ships are getting better at defending themselves. They're able to take the hits more. Firepower's also doubled. Isn't it pronounced Lurtis? It's an interesting one. If you follow my family history and the one who served on the descendants of the cousin who served on that, the great uncle, I think it was a great uncle who served on it. They call it Lertz, so that's what I tend to call it as. But there are probably many pronunciations. One of the things you have with the Royal Navy, and a lot of ships, in fact, in Royal Navy history, is you have how you were supposed to pronounce it, because, well, where does the name come from? In this case, it's named after a figure in Greek mythology, who's also, I think, a character in Shakespeare's Hamlet. But the trouble is, it's then crewed by people who probably haven't, most of them have never even touched Greek mythology. And they have better things to do with their time than go and learn it. So their pronunciation is never usually right according to the textbooks. Because textbooks go, it's supposed to be pronounced this way, so we'll pronounce it this way. Now, this ship's an important asset. It's a cable asset. Provides the Royal Navy with a lot of interesting firepower, and it comes into service during a war.
What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, Letts is laid down in a nicest possible way, probably, considering her status within the group. She's laid down. I'm just trying to find my notes again. There it is. In July 1912, launched June 1913, commissioned October 1913. She sold for scrapping in December 1921. But what I mean happens with all this is that she's in service from the get-go of World War One. She's one of many destroyers the Royal Navy has in service at the beginning of World War One, and she's already useful. She's already valued and a capable part of the force. Why? I'd argue because quite a lot of her stuff is off the shelf. So it's available, and they can build her. And that's something. You can build a better ship if you make it more bespoke. You can make it fit your needs more. You can make it better suited for what you want out of it. You make it more cost efficient if you go focused on your own needs. You don't have any redundancy in capability. However, if you want to produce a large volume of them, and if you want to have others be able to buy them to spread the cost and pull the cost, you want to have multiple entries. You want them have them as balanced and flexible as they physically can be. And these were capable assets, again, because they had to be. Now, the question should be open, but this is a World War I build-up, and please note, before anyone jumps down my throat, that's what's coming next, okay? So why did I pick an R class like Rowena as my World War I build? A, I wanted a ship which was being built in the thick of it, in the thick of fighting. Rowena seemed to fit that bill. And B, that she was capable of getting involved in that fighting, and she did. Rowena's quite a flexible asset. And she has to be. She really does have to be. Why? Because Royal Navy destroyers are going around doing all sorts of little interesting missions. Occasionally they'll get sent on shore bombardment stuff, sometimes they'll do other options, sometimes they'll be harassing convoys, sometimes they'll be protecting convoys, sometimes they'll be escorting the main fleet, sometimes they'll be off on detached duty. They're always wandering around. Now, Rowena, after World War I, was sent to Gibraltar along with Romola, and they took part in the anti-submarine flotilla in Portland in 1st January 1926, and working with ASW operations. Now, this was actually quite a popular assignment for her time after World War I, being used for these things, because, well, with her testing out the latest in ASDIC and her working away with developing their systems, that meant she was not usually away for a long time and her crews could have quite a good family time. But, you know, there are benefits. Swings and roundabouts. One of the troubles being fitted with all the stuff first is she's expected to use it first. But no, they are a good ship. The R-class are good. And her size was roughly 990 tons. In normal, she has Brown Curtis turbines. She has 3 Yarrow boilers. She could do 36 knots. Technically, she could do 36 knots. And she carried an armament of a 4-inch gun, a single 2-pounder, that's a 40mm gun, anti-aircraft mode, and 4 21-inch, that's 533mm, torpedo tubes. All useful. All an additional force structure. All a capability which needs to be understood. She is a balanced and capable system. Now, I'm going to apologise now because my eyes do keep closing. That's not because I'm tired or anything weird like that. It's because I've had bright flashing lights in them all day. So, I may or may not do Discord later. I've had bright flashing lights in them because we've been working on the lighting system. So, yeah. I apologise. Have the electricians back in tomorrow again.
I thought Colaborative was doing Call of Duty. Circle of Doom. Oh, let's check that. Check the Circle of Doom's not functioning. According to the system, it's all going okay. Should be okay. Yeah, I probably should do. I did consider switching around tomorrow's live and tomorrow's video and tonight's live, but I decided against that because, honestly, I'm making Night wait a bit longer. Yes, Night. For the comment you did the other day where you basically tried to write out and predict what was going to be in the next video. I am making you wait a bit longer to find out. For those who don't realise this, I can be motivated by pettiness at that level. But Ryana was cool. And her class were cool. They were built as war emergency ships. They are part of the war emergency program. But when you look at them, they are a really good evolution over the Royal Navy destroyers they had at the time. And that was very much a conscious thought of the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy was thinking, any one of these ships, we could end up lasting a long, long time. So we better develop on from our existing program. And here's a dirty little secret that's forgotten. If you have an ongoing existing program of construction, it's far easier to rapidly adapt that than it is to build something from scratch, especially in emergency. Because you've got something already going through. You've got some things already sorted out. In fact, I have to state that so often, it worries me. But that being said, we get to the 1920s. And this is the USS Lamson of the Clemson class, and they are a really, really cool balance of capabilities, because think about them. Think about them. They have a huge number of torpedoes for their time. In fact, it was while testing and looking at those ships, at the things like the Lamson, and looking at its operations and thinking, oh, this could be interesting. This could be capable. She carried 12 21-inch torpedo tubes in 4 triple launchers. She carried 4 single 4-inch guns, 2 single 1-pounder AA guns, or 2 single 3-inch AA guns, and 2 depth charge rails. She's got a design top speed of 35 knots, actually achieved sometimes faster than that in testing. She is built by the Bethlehem Shipbuilding Corporation. And she is churned out along with a huge quantity of sisters. The Clemson class have 156 members, 20 lost in action over their career, but they served in service till 1948. Why they didn't serve so long? Because they are useful. They are 1,200 to 1,300 tons, depending on how you load them. They are fast enough, stable enough, and capable enough to be well looked after. They require 4 boilers, which means you can have 2 on, 2 off, and keep things running fairly easy if you want to do maintenance. They have got 2 geared steam turbines, and they have all the capability they need for the US to be very happy with them in the 1920s. I know my chair is making a lot of noise. I need to put some more lubricant on it, and probably a thing to wrap round to stop the doggy licking the lubricant off, because today the doggy has been licking a lot of lubricant, I think, that I put on it. Now, the thing is, with their 4 stacks and their guns, positioned as they were a very flexible asset. You could argue the 4 triple torpedo launchers makes them a offensively inclined vessel, but I would say the number of 4-inch guns, the
mine rails and the various capabilities they have going on, testing they have going on, means that they're actually a very balanced vessel, incredibly balanced with the needs of the nation they're supporting and are built for. And again, there are other options out there. You could have put in the British V&W class. You could have put in the French, I forget their name. All these classes, but realistically, it's the American one which is the benchmark for the period. If you are going into battle in the 1920s, if you had your choice, you probably want a whole host of Clemsons on your side, because with top speed of 35.5 knots, they're going to be faster than most other destroyers out there, including most of the British fleet, and they're going to be able to run absolute rings around their opponents, which is going to be useful, as long as the enemy plays game and comes into you. If the enemy tries to dodge around you or tries to wreck you in other ways, well, then you're not going to be able to get the fun, are you? You won't be able to. And so we have the Travel class. Now, the Travel class, I would say, are positioned in a period when you've got aircraft coming in large numbers, and whilst they were a threat in World War One, they're a guaranteed menace in World War Two. You've got the torpedoes desired. They have that. They carry them, although not marked or pictured on here as where spare torpedoes are held. But they were a heavy gunner on. They were a gun-focused vessel, and that makes sense for a beginning of World War Two. It really does, because you need the guns for your air defense, you need the guns for shore bombardment, you need the guns for a lot of missions, which frankly torpedoes won't do. So having the guns makes for a more flexible asset, a better shield and spear. It does. But still, and I do mean but still, it doesn't make them perfect. The lack of a proper dual-purpose mount for the 4.7-inch guns means they don't really engage aircraft at the altitudes they should be engaging at them. They can engage them at long range, but not short range, which is annoying and scary. And pom-poms will only get you so far. Pom-poms will really only get you so far. It's sad. But more importantly for the Travel class, realistically, is they are about the destroyers coming into their point at which they are now going to be diplomatic assets in and of themselves. They are going to be able to trust it to do missions solo, including quite high-profile ones solo. And for the Royal Navy, this is a really big thing, even prior to World War II, when they have lots of ships spare. Theoretically, you have lots of ships spare on paper. The reality is they're doing something. They are doing something. This is the conversation we've all had probably at some point, either from one end or the other side, with people who are working on a computer all day, is, are they really working? Well, you can't see anything unless they're printing it out. And then that's killing a lot of trees. That really is. I say this knowing that a huge cart of the papers just arrived in my house from my sister. But leaving tree murder aside, and there is a huge amount going on for paper, a large chunk of development going on in this period is not just though about the science and the metallurgy and the capabilities of the actual weapon systems and those things. It's also about the people on board them and how they're going to be used and how they're going to be trained and how they're going to be supported, and that is a problem. It's a problem because it's the next stage of evolution. You see, you had the period in World War One where the destroyers learned to be independent actors, and they learned to act as groups and their own little wolf packs, really, attacking bigger targets and taking them down. In the interwar period, you tried to professionalize that and to maintain it. By the time you got 20 years down the line, things get more problematic, because what were teaching aids have now become mantras. What were examples have now become gifts from heaven. What were ideas have now become enshrined in enough documentation, enough thought processes that you're not going to move anywhere unless you change it all. Which is what they do. Realistically.
World War II is also the period when the destroyer starts to change more and more into the cruiser. But there is a certain rebellion against that, but we are currently at the Shameless Book Plug. And it's been 45 minutes to get here. Which is fun. Now, destroyers bring this insane asylums since 1900. Not really. Not really, sadly enough. But as said, we are at the Shameless Book Plug. This is normally the point where I should do questions, and I'm going to do questions. It says, I will do questions. And we have one from Stafford. And that's it at the moment. Oh, agenda 8420 has been as here as well. If destroyers of the past could talk, interact as a lane style with their modern contemporaries, what would they say to them? I imagine the Royal Navy's ones would ask where the rest of their sisters were and what happened to them, and then possibly be doing a one massive ball of storming up the Thames. It would be an interesting conversation. I think the French ones are probably going, hello, and their counterparts are going, mm-hmm. Italian ones would probably be complaining about something. The reason I say this is because basically most Italian ships just claim they're not the Amigo Vespucci. Because the Amigo Vespucci is just so cool and so gorgeous. Pretty much all Italian ships spend half their lives claiming they're not her. I'm sure about it. Well, I know quite a few of their crews complain they're not aboard her because of the quality of food. The rest of the Italian Navy is excellent food, I would say, but compared to the rest of the world, yeah. But the Amigo Vespucci is probably the best of that. $84.20. Has anyone been crazy enough to try and put submerged torpedo tubes on a destroyer? Yes, people have attempted that and had bright ideas. It hasn't lasted long though, and usually gets changed out. But people have bright ideas. People like that. They like to have bright ideas. So, what was the world's first combined diesel and gas ship of destroyer class? Ooh, the first Kodag. That's a question. Interesting. That is an interesting question. First, honestly, I'm not sure. I know the Germans worked on it with their frigates, but I don't know if who got their first alphabet on them. It could have been HMS Exmouth of the Royal Navy. There is a potentiality of it. Potentially it's HMS Exmouth. Potentially, but it's unlikely to be her. But it's her, because there's a lot of wandering around that topic around her. So, what would you have ever seen a 10,000-ton gun destroyer? If you're at 10,000 tons, you might as well have missiles as well as guns. You might as well, though. In a nice way, you just got missiles, or well, that's what I say. If you are just, bringing missiles, you're not bringing the full suite of weapons. If you're not bringing guns, you're not bringing the full suite of weapons. Either way, you've not got the full suite of weapons, and frankly, a destroyer needs both. The Royal Navy has done more experimenting with these kinds of systems than I often care to remember. But, yeah, it's not really pushing towards any of them now. In terms of the idea of going for the Type 22s, which were all missile frigates, And let's be honest, the Type 42s at certain points they were considering getting rid of the guns. They decided not to because, well, reality caved in. And reality said, you actually need to think about this. You need to think it through properly. Unfortunately, some people just don't like to think these things through. So, World War II. Well, I have the Fletcher class, the USS Chevalier. And the Chevalier is a great example of a very useful general purpose asset. There is no one who's going to argue that a Fletcher class was not the shield and the sword spear of the US Navy. They were. They were capable of doing a lot more, and they did it. But the thing that also amazes me about these ships is they have quite so many guns on them. Yes, they have a fairly hefty torpedo profile, but look at the guns they have on them. There's quite a lot of them. The thing about their torpedoes is they have to turn broadside on to use them. But no, with the Fletchers, they have been focused about where they are and how they're going to use them. And that works for them. It works for them. It produces a very useful, very flexible asset for its period. Again, I was tempted by some of the British destroyers, I was tempted by some of the French ones, but each of them have a point in which they are not being a general purpose asset. They're not something which is a flexible asset that can do lots of different jobs. And that's a problem, because you need them to be able to do lots of different jobs. A destroyer in this period could be called on to do minesweeping, it could be called on to do anti-submarine warfare work, air defense work, surface action defense work. It could be called on to do a lot. So if it doesn't have enough crew, enough systems to maximize the use of this crew, it's also going to wreck itself, because there's only so much you can put the human body through. Trust me, I regularly try to exceed mine. It's my way of trying to train it. But yeah, it's a good ship. Useful ships. Very useful ships. Right. Canadian tribal class. No, we've covered already the tribals. They were the ships of the 1930s, and they were balanced because of their guns and firepower. Again, it's worthwhile noting this is an 8-gun ship. This one is a 5-gun ship, and in terms of their main armament, and it's the lower down scale weapon system, which, when these ships are being replaced, everyone's worried about what they're going to do to replace it, because these ships are very, very flexible. It's one of the reasons why so many of them are built. And there are an absolute ton of them built. I know there are various other ships which they sort of put up and go, yeah, we build all these ships. Did you? That's a lot of ships. But here is the other thing you got coming through. If you look the whole way through, the Royal Navy destroyers are very rarely the absolute best of the technology you're going to see. Same with the US ones. Why? Because they're building a lot of them. And you can only afford, let's say, X of 100% solutions, which are the most up-to-date technology you've got available, and literally you are now pausing construction to putting in all this new technology and this new building style. But you have a problem in terms of that's going to mitigate against you getting mass. If you want to have the best capability, that's great, but often the best capabilities are going to be fringe systems which are not going to be easily accessible off the shelf, and it's not going to be a stockpile around, so you're going to have a lot of delayed construction. Usually with a destroyer, what you're looking around is an all-around system which can be built with stuff which is pretty much off the shelf or near enough off that you can actually build it very quickly and succinctly. And also, an argument why I didn't put the Canadian tribals up here, well, frankly, if I put the Canadian tribals up there, I'm loading the base too much. And even I would admit that. Post-World War II, well, we still have gun destroyers around this point. See, the missiles haven't yet come in, realistically, when these vessels are being put in. And so you have the Daring class come out, which has 6
45-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. And they are turrets. They're not particularly thick turrets. You do wonder how much of a spooling injury you're going to get if any one of them gets hit by a target. But they have a lot of firepower, and they also have a lot of torpedoes. They are a balanced asset for their period. The Daring class are also quite cruel in that, and cruel in a way, in that you can make a 4-year-old draw them quite easily. They really are quite easy to get to be drawn by a 4-year-old. Any amount of suggestion you can get them out of a 4-year-old. The thing that they will have trouble with is the mast, but usually they get away with that by just painting it dark, so it disappears into a dark background, or ignoring it completely. But yeah, these ships are good. They're capable. They provide a large amount of assets and a large amount of capability for their time, even though not enough of them are built. And it's similar across when we look at the American counterparts and the Russian-Soviet counterparts, in that they are often based on wartime learning and understanding, not necessarily based on the world they're now dealing with. And that's important because that can come down and bite them if they get into too much trouble. But yeah, these ships are good assets. They aren't kept around as long as they could be. Other powers are more keen to upgrade them with missile systems than Britain was, because Britain didn't want to pay the bill. But they were useful with their capabilities. And especially useful at blocking riots, where certain members under trial for Nazi collaboration were trying to cause trouble. But yeah, you have these are capabilities. Their guns are fairly good at AA work. At this point, missiles aren't available. Torpedoes are fairly good for all they're doing. They were good assets. They were good general purpose assets. They could theoretically take mines if they needed. They had anti-submarine capabilities in terms of a large ASW mortar. They had all they needed. And yes, the stacks in these have got very small. No longer are the stacks the symbol of power or power or superiority. I have no idea why my notes that had a note about people with Nazis being on trial there. I followed it through, and now I'm looking and going, it does make sense, yes, but why did I add that section into my notes? On what grounds did I add that into my notes? No idea. I think I must have been watching a video about something, the recent the Russell Crowe's version of the trials, or something like that, for me to have added that in there and just going, yeah, after I'd said it, I'm just sort of going, it's in my notes, and I know I meant to put it in my notes, I know I meant to, and I read it out properly, but why did I add this into my notes? Poodles. Now, some of these ships could last a very, very long time in service, and some of them went off and served powers other than the Royal Navy, and they lasted a really long time. But realistically, these ships were also meant as interim cover until you could get missile ships online and work out what they needed. Nuremberg trials. I have no idea. I'm just looking at my notes going, why did I add that bit in? Hello, Renault. Why did I add that bit in? Now, at a certain point, you start to have missiles coming in, and, well, in the 50s, that's really when it sort of happens. You've got the late 40s, you've got a lot of ships like this coming out, which have a lot of guns and capability on them, because they are to cover the transition period. I would argue, if you're looking at another transitional period design, you'll talk about the Type 31s. They are great frigates for dealing with things like drone threats, etc., because the sheer amount of flak they can put up in the air. great for cheap volume, high volume things like drones, engaging, destroying them. But let's be honest, we're all talking about lasers as the coming system. But lasers aren't here yet, so you need something in between. That's still going to have the status and going to cover these things. That's what this is. That's what the Type 31 is. The Charles F. Adams class, well, they're a little bit different. They are. They're also special in their own way, but they are a little bit different. Their difference is that they are now well over 3,000 tons in standard, over 4,500 tons fully loaded, so they're putting on a huge amount of fuel and systems when they are getting ready to go to sea. And they are festooned with radars. They have a missile launcher. They have a ASROC system. They have surface vessel torpedo tubes, and they have quite a decent little gun on them. A decent 5-inch one. Well, actually, a couple of them. They can't carry aircraft. They don't really have the facilities for them, but they're still very capable assets. In the 1950s, and these ships mostly come out between 1959 and January 1960. Well, they're commissioning. Let's be honest, they've got that one to 61s. 64, or actually it's August 64. I'm sorry, I thought it was January 1965, but it's August 1964. You know, they're commissioned between. And they are good ships. They are built in the late 1950s, commissioned in the 1960s. They come in, they provide the US Navy with a lot of capability. Because they have the flexibility. When you start looking at their weapon systems, they're able to take RIM 24 SAM system. Later they get upgraded to taking the standard missile 1. Harpoon anti-ship missiles. And various other systems which were available at the time. So, they have these as options. I'd also point out that these ships are 33 knots, but there is an argument against that speed. There is an argument against going that speed, because they do also have very high pressure boilers, and if they're being used at very high pressure, then that's going to add up to maintenance. But yeah, it's a good vessel. The RN does go in for auto-loading guns like the USN does. Then in mid-Cold War, well, I'm using the Sprinters. Why am I using the Sprinters? Because if you're looking in the mid-Cold War, you're looking for everything you have in the earlier Cold War, the first missile entry systems, and more. You're looking for more flexibility. You're looking for more capability. I'd say also it's worthwhile realizing at this point that the destroyers still are very much the second part players to the battleship. To the battleships, except if they're American Navy, but cruisers definitely. With cruisers still taking the lead and being the dominant factors, especially in command and control. Which does explain some decisions taken in this class, which were actually quite big and spacious, and probably would have been good for it. Has a flight deck and a hangar now. For up to 2 medium-lift helicopters. SH-60 Seahawks. Have 2 5-inch guns. They have 2 Phalanx. They have an 8-cell ASROC launcher when they're improved. They have an 8-cell NATO Speed Sparrow Mark 29 missile launcher. They have some quadruple Harpoon missile systems. And I think it's the Mark 32 triple torpedo tubes. Plus, eventually, they would have Mark 41 VLS with Tomahawks for strike capacity. These ships were all about their capacity to be useful. And that's, again, the general purpose nature of the destroyer. It's your sword and your shield. It's supposed to be able to defend you against threats, and it's also supposed to be a threat itself. That explains why I've not used the Soviet as the example here, because the Soviets are often orientated around either being the defensive or the threat. They're either the shield or the spear. They're not always the same. They're not always the same in one. I talked about this when I did the Soviet destroyers. They were capable, they were useful, but there were limits on them. There were limits. Now, with these assets, it's hard to actually argue against the list of capabilities and go, you know what, that hasn't got something I want. No, it's got pretty much everything you should sensibly want. Having the Sea Sparrow launcher, and also having quadruple harpoons, and having VLS for cruise missiles, etc., meant they had a lot of room for improvement. They had a lot of systems already built in, they could expand upon. Boom Boom. Seems to be quite oops all Western. Not yes and no. And I can explain that. I'm using these ships not... Now, these aren't the best. I'm talking about what the idea... These are the ones which I'm using as the examples of the best. As in, okay, these are the capabilities you want. They also have negative points. There is no ship which is the perfect ship. Why? Because they're all built for their different nations to a different extent. What's wrong with this one from in terms of capability if you're talking about another navy taking on? It's actually quite a complicated layout and complicated structure to maintain. And you're going to be dealing with quite a lot of issues from their builds on. So basically, there are more navies than the Royal Navy and the US Navy in this video. We're going to reach them in a bit. But again, when you're talking about as standards or an ideal, usually you want to go for the benchmark navy as your base point, because they're going to probably build the closest to it. Because the reason is the reason a benchmark navy is a benchmark navy. It's usually the one which is to an extent leading the technology and setting the standards. So that's what I tend to that's what we've sort of started off with. I don't think anyone can really argue back in this period, especially, there really aren't that many options other than the Royal Navy. Once we get back into this period, especially, the Royal Navy has more classes than pretty much anyone else combined. Their sheer numbers alone allow them to advantage. But again, if you want this, one of the things that's going to come up as we talk about, so I'm talking about these ships, is if you're building for mass, you often cut out things because honestly, it's cumulatively going to be extortionate. But if you are building and you haven't got mass, then tacking every capability you can in the hull as much as you can makes sense. This is actually the problem with the modern Royal Navy, I would argue. One of the problems with the Royal Navy is that we keep thinking we are going to have mass. But the thing is, that means you go, okay, we can afford to cut these things because we have the mass of ships. You can't. Not today. You don't have the mass anymore. So you need to build a general purpose asset. A true destroyer is a truly general purpose asset. Also, I'd point out, Boom, I did a whole video on the Soviet destroyers not that long ago. And so I haven't yet got to the videos about the Royal Navy and the US Navy in these sort of periods. So, I can sort of talk about them more freely without going back and going, refer to my earlier video, which personally I prefer not to do. And this is a wide enough video that I won't have to refer to it. I will probably refer to it at some points, but I won't have to. I'm not one of those people who likes to do videos where it's a case of constantly, and for this, please refer to this earlier video, and refer to this earlier video, and this earlier video, because I like to try and answer a question in a video, and a topic in a video, not turn it into some kind of, I don't know, treasure map quest through my videos. That always seems to me, and I realise there are people who do this for very good legitimate reasons, and I have complete respect for them, but some people I swear do that literally to try and drive up their viewership. And I go, no.
Charles F. Adams were a good class. But it's worthwhile noting about them is that the Charles F. Adams, as gorgeous as they are, and they are gorgeous, is based on the Sherman class destroyers, which had been all gun destroyers. And if you go look at them, you will see the similarities. And the thing about these destroyers, the Forrest Sherman types, is they are the last destroyers which come from, if we go back to earlier, wrong way, the Fletcher line. So basically, you can draw a line from the design and architecture used in the Fletcher class straight to the Forrest Shermans, who are then evolved into the Charles F. Adams class, and then you get to the Sperances. And the Sperances are, as I talked about, some really capable ships, but they are very crew intensive, very labour intensive. Yeah, there are some good books about the big books of Soviet warships. The one which keeps coming up lately and people keep asking me to put out, so I will do it, is this one. Stalin's Ocean-Going Fleet by Jürgen Rohr. And Mikhail S. Markanov. It's a good one. Monakov. It's a good book. It's fun, especially when you want to talk to people about what the Soviets were planning, because it's all about that. But when you see the video tomorrow night, the recorded one, I think it's this book. Yeah, it's you're gonna see. Oh, sorry, Poodle, reaching over you. Oh. Thank you for moving. That makes my life a little bit easier, but I already got up to go around you. Poodles. Tomorrow night's one is going to be full of stuff about from this. Tomorrow night's one. This is also this is from Eric Krona and revised by Dieter Groening, etc. And this is, well, basically you go into this book and you go, right, I want destroyers. And you'll find the destroyers in here. You also find a whole lot of gunboats and all sorts of other systems, but it's a pretty cool system. A pretty cool book. There are 2 volumes. Basically, in my scenario, I went to page 199. And you're going to see a lot, and I do mean this, a lot tomorrow night, of not just information from the book, but also the lovely drawings it has in the book. Because it has a whole lot of spec plans. And shows you how individual the ships were. And how the Germans were doing a lot of design differentiations, and they were changing their stems, they were changing their bow shapes, stern shapes, the whole time with their destroyers. It's one of the reasons why they have problems working together as a group. But again, this is another reason why I'm focusing on the Americans and the Brits as my sort of baseline points to give you examples here of. This is a good capability, this ship. Is it perfect? No. Is it more capable than most of its counterparts? Yes. It's carrying a fairly decent amount of missiles, it's carrying a fairly decent magazine depth, it's carrying a fairly decent capability. And one of the other things you have to remember in this period is the US Navy has a lot more cruisers than they do today. One of the points that comes up today, especially when we do, and the reason I've structured this the way I have done, is I'm trying to show you a forward comparison of how things change and evolve over time. Would this fit as being a good destroyer today? No. Doesn't have enough magazine depth, so it's probably not big enough. This is despite the fact the Spruance class were 8,000 tons fully loaded. They are not small ships, They are not small ships at all. In full load, they are just a little bit underneath the weight of a modern Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer. And this is one of the reasons why earlier, when that very nice gentleman did suggest, well, you know, these are a high-low mix of destroyers, I was giggling away because there weren't any of those. Those were all quite big destroyers. All quite capable ones. Electrical drawing info. Runon. Okay, I'll have a think about it before we get to the questions. And there will be questions at the end as always. Bishon, I'm not sure if you're serious when you say that, but that worries me when you say those sort of things. They have frigate captains and corvette captains, and therefore no destroyer captains. No, that's because destroyers tend to get captains. Because a corvette captain tends to be a lieutenant commander, a frigate captain tends to be a commander, and a destroyer captain, well, is usually a captain, so they are just called a captain. There's also the fact that some nations refer to ships as frigates rather than destroyers because of how they use them and how they fit them. And again, remember what I talked about earlier about destroyers usually are as much a shield as they are a spear? If you look at the Spruance class and you look at their weapon systems, you're going, well, they carry harpoon launchers and they carry torpedo tubes and they have various tomahawk missiles. So they're very much capable of being a spear. But a lot of them, by the time they're getting used for other nations and on missions, actually lose some of those systems and change them for others and become far more defensive in an organization. So you can argue they do become frigates. You know, I'm a big believer in that size isn't the only thing which decides whether something is a destroyer or a frigate or something like that. There's also what capabilities you build into it. There is also very much what capabilities you build into it. Now, late Cold War. It's very, very late Cold War because they are laid down 1988. They are the flower of 1970s thinking and 1980s design architecture. They are the early books. Hello. They are some gorgeous, gorgeous ships. But, and I say this as the big, glorious Glutidus Maximus involved in us all. These ships are designed originally to be part of a networked battle group, and they are conceived an idea when there's going to be a strike cruiser and various other things around them to direct them. And they're always going to be part of a carrier battle group. So originally they're not designed with a hangar. They're arguably, therefore, a step back in their ASW capability and their ability to shield a force. But that's based on the fact that they're supposed to be frigates to do that thing. So, okay, fine. These are the benchmark destroyers for their period, but let's be honest, there is a step back in capability in them, in the Flight 1s, versus, let's say, again, the Spruance class, because they don't have their own helicopter. And yes, you can go, well, they have the ability for a helicopter to base itself off the back because they do have a landing pad, and yes, that's right. But that's a very different scenario than having your own helicopter, which you have a hangar for to do maintenance of, and you can bring with you and take with you and do all sorts of things with, and support. There's also... We're talking about the Flight 1s, okay? The Burks get updated as time goes on, evolved as times go on, but the fact these are still in service. There's also very much the reality that with the Flight 1 Burks, as gorgeous as they are, and they are gorgeous ships, don't get me wrong, they are gorgeous looking ships, but there's a reason the Flight 1s are about 8,400 tons, and the latest Flight 3s have gained
are 1,500 tons and are 9,900 tons. There's been a lot of things added onto them. As well as they've gained, although in that time they have only gained about 4.5 foot in length. They've gone from 154 meters to 155.3, or 505 foot to 509 foot. Well, 509.5 foot. These ships, though, are listed as being in excess of 30 knots. Official speed. Unofficially, yeah, speed's less matter, doesn't matter as much. Is a destroyer now maneuvering to engage its own targets? This is one of the things that I see comes up with people who go, oh, they need to be high speed. Well, they do need to have a surge of speed, and probably around 30 knots, yes. But are they going to be using their speed and maneuver to engage targets? Are they back in the early periods when the speed was important because you were physically getting in the way of things? If you go back to realistic ships as late as probably this period, their job was to physically get in the way between the threat and the capital ships and the formation they were defending, right? They had to physically maneuver to be physically in the way. So speed starts to really matter in comparison to the other units. Once you get, though, to about this point onwards, speed has started to matter less, as long as you can maintain with your units. Maintain with your ships, maintain with your capital ships, maintain with the things you're escorting, you're fine. Because you've got weapons which are going to range out. Now, the big thing for these is they have a, well, quite a decent VLS system. Flights 1 and 2 have 90 cells on Mark 41 VLS systems. A 29 cell system aft and a 61 cell system forward. Flights 2A and 3, then all 1-on-1s have 32s and 64 cells, so 96 cells. And those systems, that's where they get their flexibility now, because those systems allow them to carry Tomahawk cruise missiles in both its land attack and anti-ship variant. When you have the anti-ship variant both in the past and in the future. You can carry SM-3s, which are the anti-satellite / theatre ballistic missile defense systems. SM-6s, which are a pretty good standard missile for air defense. The older SM-2ER and SM-2MR are all carried. They can carry quad-packed enhanced Sea Sparrow. And they can carry ASROC. So they've got a very good complement of missiles which can go into their Mark 41 VLS. Arguably, if you're by adding Mark 41 VLS in strike length cells, you are automatically putting your ship into the capacity where it can be both a sword and a shield. You're arguably putting forward the fact it could be a destroyer. At that point, you start to get an argument into whether it's a destroyer or a frigate based on probably number of cells it carries. Again, if you're talking about 32 cells, it's probably a frigate. If you're talking about anything above that, it's probably heading towards a destroyer. It's a fun thing, but that is only a very rough rule of thumb. It isn't an accurate rule of thumb, because some of the ships we're dealing with today, you have to remember, were designed in the 1990s to the early 2000s when the world was going to be peaceful and only wars would only happen to the great powers if they decided to let them happen. Otherwise, everything would be set by their schedule as no one would dare fight them. So why do you need such a thing as magazine depth? That's so plebeian. If I'm ranting at all about this, I should warn you that, and I've already mentioned, I did spend this morning talking to the Washington Post. and having discussions about this stuff, and it's a fun thing which is going to be coming out soon. But yeah, life is good. It will be interesting to see a first-gen destroyer move more next to more money. It would be, but first-gen destroyers are about 400 tons. The modern ones are about 10,000 tons. So you're talking about something which is a 25th of the displacement. All weapons platforms are a compromise between the holy trinity of protection, firepower, and mobility. To an extent. To an extent. I would say one of the things you have an advantage is power density has been improving and still is improving to an extent of the amount of power you can get from the amount of space. And firepower, I would say these days is a function of space as well. So you can get more out of your hull if you design it sensibly. Sensors are good. Mobility is useful. Firepower is essential, but you can balance these things all quite successfully. But again, as I talked about before, there are some price points which are constants in life. There really are. Now, the thing that's always annoyed me about these ships is the first ones had 2 phalanx. Okay? 1 front, 1 rear. And I couldn't for the life of me understand why. I don't have a hangar. You look at this superstructure, you look at the shaping. Why can you not have 3 phalanx on it? Think about it. 1 front in the position it is historically. It's got quite a wide angle of fire. And the 1 aft, instead of having 1 aft, you can have 1 on either side aft. So they can both fire forward. Now think about that. If the one on the front gets knocked out for any reason, you've still got coverage from the other 2. If one of the side ones gets knocked out, you've still got coverage from the other 2. You've already got 2 close-in weapon systems on the ship. A third one's really not going to cost you a lot. 4 would have been nice, but you can make do with 3. This is the point I'm making. There is one of these things in these ships, especially in some of the modern ones, some of the ideas have gone, okay, we can save money. Because 2 gives us the appearance of covering everything. But it doesn't if there's any problems. And that's realistically an issue you've been dealing with. Because, okay, if you're in the middle of a large task group and you've got lots of ships with closing weapon systems and systems around you, admittedly you're going to be operating quite far apart, not like the modern closed-up pictures, but quite further apart than that. You've got some redundancy, and yes, I can see how it makes sense. But if your ship is supposed to be operating solo, in any shape or form, whether that's as a picket, i.e. outside of the task group center and the core area protected, or actual on solo operations, then redundancy starts to really matter. Now, one of the things I do like these from the redundancy perspective, and this is something which is worthwhile considering again for ships, is they've divided their VLS up into 2 sets. You have, on the flight ones, a 29 forward, and I think it was a 61 aft. On the flights 2A and onwards, it's a 32 cell forward and a 64 cell aft, I think. I think that's fore and aft. Or have I got them the wrong way around? Checking my notes, because surely I'll put that in my notes. Yeah, it's the 32. It is. I am right. It is the smaller one forward. Oh, I was worrying about that. Now, here's an interesting discussion. There's all sorts of things going on about the VLS size here in this thing, but that's the point. That's one of the things to get into and think about, because I would argue a strategic cells are worth more than air defense cells, because you can put air defense missiles in a strategic missile strategic cells. You can't put strategic. You can't put strike cells. Not strategic. Well, they are sort of strategic when you consider the range of a Tomahawk cruise missiles, but let's be honest, let's call it strike. But you can't tend to put strike missiles in a tactical launcher, which is the anti-aircraft launcher of the VLS systems. So you always have to think about this when you're putting these ships together. It's one of the big problems again with, if I want to use the example, Type 45s, but I can also use the example of the French and the Italian Horizon entries in the scenario. They all have the tactical A50 Silver system, which is very good for launching missiles quickly. But they only have 48. They only have 48 of those missiles, and that's not enough. That's not enough. And they can only take that. And now the British, in their wisdom, the British government are taking the 24-cell cam launchers off the Type 23s and are sticking them on the Type 45s instead of, they were going to go to the Type 26s or the 31s. I think there was a debate. But the thing is, they're going on the Type 45, so we are getting even smaller VLS cells to fill the hole which was made for a strike length system. Look, I talked about it before. There was various scenarios around the Type 45 at one point, and one of those scenarios would have been, and I've gone back and checked some notes since I wrote it, because I wrote it and went, well, it was, at one point they were considering 64 cells and 64 cells. They were. At one point they were considering 64 cells of forward of A50 and 64 strike length cells aft of Mark 41. But in the configuration they eventually went in, there was actually a theorization, and this theorization was put forward, and this was in my dad's little diary. So, not I can't really say this is definitely true or not, because it's just a note from my dad's diary. And as you know, he was a naval architect involved in various projects, as I said before. So, I'm telling you where the source is. I'm telling you what it is, but it's as much emphasis as you want to put on a naval architect who was involved in the project. So it's not. But they'd worked out with the system as it was, the 48 cell. They'd worked out they could put, if they wanted, a 32 cell in after that of Mark 41. Its official plan was a 24 cell, but they prepared to accept a 16 cell. And they could have repeated that if they'd added in the middle section, which I've told you about before. All BAE design ships are designed with a section which can be cut. They can be cut down the middle and have a bit added in. Well, the idea was you could have added in the extra engine power pack in the design and added in at the top another 48 A50s and another 32 Mark 41s. So you could have had 160 VLS cells. And the joke was that would have made the daring destroyers really cruisers. And he put his thing. But basically the idea was that would be the maximum you could have built into it. And again, if you'd added in the extra gas turbines and engines and those extra VLS cells, we wouldn't be probably having this conversation today about the Type 45s being underarmed. We would probably be asking why they only built 6 of them. Again, though, still. But again, this was a naval architect's note. This is a naval architect thinking about it and putting some ideas together on it. It would have been fun. It would have meant they would have had 96 A50 cells for air defense and 64 cells Mark 41 VLS for SM-3 Tomahawk ASROC. And quad packing cam eventually. So you could have basically gone, I'm going to assign 16 cells to each of those missions. So 16 ASROC, 16 SM-3, 16 Tomahawks, and 16 quad pack cam which means they would be carrying 64 cams as well.
There are sometimes I'm looking at some of these old notes and thinking, perhaps we could start with these old ideas for the maximal Type 45 as the basis for our Type 83. We might get something interesting. But yeah, these are good ships. And, well, it kind of takes us through to what is the post-World War under discussion destroyers today, the ideal destroyer. And I've made no bones of what my favourite destroyer is at the moment that's currently in service. I like the Japanese, I do. I technically think the 55s are too close to be called a cruiser. I'm sorry, I know they're officially called destroyers. I put them in my destroyer video because they're officially called a destroyer. But those things are big enough they should be called a frigating cruiser. Okay? That's the category they're aiming for. Those things come in and they stomp. So then we're into destroyer categories of things below that. And again, like the 52Ds. But if I'm going to pick what's my favourite destroyer at the moment and my ideal destroyer, I would probably go with, despite its problems, the Maya class of the Japanese Navy. The JMSDF. Why? Because they've done what they did historically. Historically, the Japanese were very good at taking another nation's design and making it perfect. Because they're only building 2, or rather 8, but it's over a different period of time to build 8. This is the last batch of 2. They can afford to refine things to a degree which someone who's building 30 or 40 of something can't. Let's put it this way. If you're building 2 of something, and you are going to afford, if I make these changes, it's going to add an extra, let's say it's going to take it from $2 billion to $2.1 billion each. That's an extra $200 million. That's expensive, but it's not problematic. If I'm building 22 or something, and they cost 22, and they cost $2 billion, it's going to take them up to 22. It's going to take them up to. It's going to add another, to 2.1. Then it goes from being 44 billion, which is already expensive, to 46.2 billion. And that, a nicest way for that price, I could add an extra ship. So which is more useful for me? To have a 23rd ship or have that extra system? And okay, yes, it's a bit of a it's very simple mathematics, but that's the thing. Once you get into you're building ships in enough volume, the actually making the individual ships better, is it better to pay for an extra ship, which is an 85% solution, or pay more money for 90% solutions? That's the question. And again, it's a very balanced design. It's got everything going for the early Berksas. It's got helicopter hangar. Again, it hasn't got enough in terms of close-in weapon systems for my liking. I would like more. I would like laser systems. I would like more. The Japanese are really pushing forward with lasers. I would like to see these fitted with their railguns. They have a very nice railgun system. I wouldn't mind if they maybe replaced their boat decks with railguns, if they could have had them. But the thing is, these have capabilities, and that's also something you can do because. One amount of times I've seen people go, well, so our close-in weapon system needs to be this or this. Now, I would say one of the reasons why I tend to be slightly problematic on when it comes to the rolling airframe missile and that system of close weapon system is, to my mind, to an extent that you've already got the enhanced Sea Sparrow or the CAM, the Sea Scepter as it's called, and they start to coalesce around the site. They're giving you something which is very similar in terms of capability. The CAM can, the ESM and CAM can reach out further, but they are very much a point defense missile system. And I start to go, well, is it better to have something which is a slightly different, more complementary capability rather than a similar capability? Also, you can carry a lot more 20mm rounds, even though I think the Phalanx is currently undergunned. Yeah. Do you have the crew and capability to support an extra asset? That is a question. Listing, that is a question. But realistically, again, when you're dealing with ships of this size already, you can usually afford that space. You can afford that scenario. But again, it's about building an asset which is both the sword and the shield. The spear and the shield of the force. Go back to the earlier phrase. It's about having something which can reach out and touch your opponent, but it can also defend you from attack. And that's what destroyers are about. This is why they get into operations, because once you are something which is that comprehensive package in one vessel, it becomes very tempting to use you for operations, because you are survivable on your own. You are able to shield others. You can shield yourself. You're able to attack on behalf of others. You can attack on behalf of yourself. But they are good ships. And they give you a capability in them. Yeah. But ideally, again, and this is something I would say for all modern destroyers, I would say my entry point at the moment for modern destroyers is if they've got less than 96 cells, someone has been shortchanging them. I think you need to have that sort of level of firepower, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up when you're talking about destroyers. When you're talking about frigates, that's a different factor. Okay, again, frigates are usually defenders of the fleet, defenders of the force. They're defensive assets. And so they are supposed to be part of a force structure far more than a destroyer is usually. If a frigate is out doing ASW picket, they will be usually still with a destroyer near enough close by to provide an air defense picket and protect them. Remember, during the Falklands War, the Royal Navy was deploying Type 22, 42 groups. And they were both doing the air defense duty and also providing a bit of an ASW picket, because there was a worry about Argentinian submarines. It's all a factor. Now, with that being said, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to bring that up. Answer that question. Senecanero. What are some testbed ships in the Dreadnought age except Dreadnought and Agincourt? And what are they testbeds for? There are lots of testbed ships in that period. Usually they're testbeds for engines, gun layouts. I did a whole video about them on the run up to Dreadnought. And how they basically tested the design out and how you got to Dreadnought. And there were a few classes of Royal Navy armoured cruiser which were basically testing out the layout for Dreadnought class before it came along. This is one of the things of when people go, oh, this ship comes from nowhere, you go, no it doesn't. There are quite a lot of test beds. And of course, the original test bed, the most famous one, is Turbina, which you can still go and see, by the way. You can go and see Turbina. She's sitting in the museum in Newcastle. You can go and see her. Literally go and see the ship, which is the original test bed for steam turbines. It's a wonderful experience to go see her. And if you're really lucky when you get there, they might let you get on board. Stafford. Thoughts on the odds that one of the Royal Canadian Navy Type 26 being named Ottawa, name alive, given that the Interwar River class had an Ottawa and one of Halifax class has name now? Let's see. Well, there is a river called the Ottawa River. And I would not be surprised if the River class ended up having one. At the moment, it's Fraser, St. Laurent, and Mackenzie. But they were preceded, of course, in service by the Halifax class. And where was... Remind me of where Ottawa was. Ottawa was literally the last of the Halifax class to enter service. So if there's going to be an Ottawa River class, it's going to be the last to enter service. Probably. So we won't know for quite a while. But, you know, there could be. It would make sense for there to be. I still love it. The amount of people who comment back on that old video and go, how do you know it's going to be the River class? And I'm going, there really aren't that many naming options once you get into Royal Navy style naming conventions. Sebastian Crutchfield, do you see dual barrel main guns coming back significantly? There is certainly a potential for it. I think it's going to depend to a certain extent on how lasers pan out, but also it's going to depend to an extent on how long we keep going with the idea that wars are going to be wars of choice. You have to remember, one of the reasons given for dropping from dual barrel systems to single barrel systems, and you can see that in this this sort of system quite nicely, because if you go back here, you've got dual barreled. There are single barreled here, but there's a lot of them. Dual barreled, you know, twins, and twins, and then singles, and then all these things forward are singles. And the reason you have the singles, part of the reason is because it's easier to maintain, and so you have two guns. If you want more than one barrel, you have two guns, and that's fine. But to an extent, once you're adjusting for not just cost efficiency, but also for firepower efficiency, i.e., how much firepower can I get on this square footage of deck, dual barrels start to come back very quickly. So as you start seeing them going, okay, we want to increase the firepower on ships, I think you're more likely to see dual barrels come back. And realistically, firepower is going to be desired back as they start to think there's more likely to be conflict where they're going to be needed. Yeah, Jay Carlton, always be very careful when you say Cunard does testing as well, and it's a merchant testing program. Cunard is one of those companies which seems to get a lot of special treatment from the Admiralty in return for them doing the testing, especially when it comes to things like that might actually become armed merchant cruisers. So, yeah, it's one of those periods of history where, look, the classic example I give is Vickers, right? The Royal Navy wants a 40, it takes the 14-inch gun and run up to World War II. Up until World War Two, up until basically the Royal Navy gets control of its own fleet era. I mean, the 1937 Inskip Award, technically handed over in 1939, just before the World War Two begins. They're not supposed to be developing a dive bomber or anything to do with dive bomber because the Air Ministry doesn't think dive bombers are useful and doesn't want a specific dive bomber reserves. The Royal Navy wants a dive bomber reserves. That's one of the reasons why the Skewer is designed. But the Skewer, remember, is called a fighter. And when the Royal Navy sort of admits, actually, no, it turns out we've got a dive bomber. We need a dive bomber site. Turns out Vickers, completely off their own back, completely without any encouragement from the British government or the Royal Navy, had developed a dive bomber site, which was one of the most accurate dive bomber sites developed for World War II. And is one of the reasons why the Skewer is arguably in the beginning of World War II the most accurate dive bomber of anyone in service in the world. It's a terrible fighter aircraft. Do not get me wrong. It should never have been used as a fighter. The fact it actually operated occasionally, having to operate as a fighter, it found itself having to operate as a fighter occasionally, is because of the various politics of the Air Ministry and the development of naval aviation in Britain in the 1920s and 30s. At all. That's it. But as dive bomber, it was really accurate. Now, the thing is, to develop that dive bombing site required a whole lot of testing and a whole lot of development and a whole lot of funding, which even a company like Vickers wouldn't do completely off their own back, especially when they turn around and only sell it to the British, and it amazingly fits exactly the weights and spacing requirements of the Blackburn Skewer to fit in with them, and fits exactly in the space for it. It's amazing. It's amazing. So, what I was saying is, you are right, they can draw on that testing, but sometimes the reason they can draw on that testing is, I'm fairly certain they'd already arranged for that testing to take place, and they found a way to make it happen. Did the Charles F. Adams get frammed? I don't know. What is a sad thing is I just went through and looked at the list and I'm going, okay, were they frammed? What happened? They were given the naval they weren't given a fram upgrade. They were given a new fret upgrade. And they were given that suite, so they weren't frammed. They had NTUs, and that was installed and various other things. But yeah, but only 3 of the class, the Tatnall, Goldsborough, and Benjamin Stoddart, actually got that. Most of them actually received only partial, if they received any upgrade, because the Burkes were coming in and the Tychos were coming in, so they didn't need to worry about it. And the last one, Goldsborough's decommissioned in 1993. The Aussies and Germans decommissioned their last ships in 2003. The Hellenic Navy, i.e. the Greeks, have decommissioned theirs. The only one which has been actually maintained as a museum ship is actually Mulder's, which is one of the German variants of the class, the Lutyens class. The Perth class destroyers were 3 ones built for the Royal Australian Navy, and they've all gone. And the Lutyens class, if you want to go round the Charles F. Adams class, or at least the closest you can get to it, to actually his museum ship, because the Americans didn't keep any of theirs, you'd have to go visit the Mulders, which is at Wilhelmshaven. I keep meaning to go to Wilhelmshaven and do some filming there, but I haven't managed to make it. I have booked all my travel details for Rotterdam and for Leeds, so that's going out. For the Armoury, I'm going to be up there a bit before and coming back down here on the Sunday. So if people do want to, if people are, and this is, I shouldn't be announcing this here, I'll make a proper announcement of this, but I'm just, while I remember it, because I was booking all today. If people want to see, if people are coming to Leeds to see me at at the conference, the Britain War conference there, I'll look forward to seeing you and I'll say hi. But I'm going to be actually there the day before, wandering around Leeds, as well as the day of the conference, and I'm coming home the Sunday. So, if people want to see me, I'm going to be there for the day before. If you want to say hi, if anyone's happens to be there, that happens to be there early. They were going to be NTU'd. Runon resident. Runon. Was the 5-inch 38 ever fitted to an autoloader turret? Ooh, I think there were some ground-based testings with it, but I'm not sure if those were official. I think by that point they pretty much all moved on to the longer gun, the 54. But I wouldn't be surprised. I seem to remember some pictures, and I wouldn't be surprised if someone did test it out with a 5-inch 38 turret as well. Well, 5-inch 38. Because it's just a very cool system, and someone's going to test it out because they have it around available to do some testing with. So these classes were doing it right. Where do other designs most commonly go wrong, so they don't become successful designs? Usually they focus in, there's too specialized. A lot of the problems with the Soviet destroyers is often they are too specialized. They are not general purpose enough. They are not enough of a shield or they're not enough of a spear. They're not enough of a spear. They're one or the other. And if you go and look through some of them, sometimes they'll focus in on... Well, if you consider the German destroyers, okay? In the interwar World War II, we're going to talk about those. Their focus on having a gun armament, which was as close as they could make to fill in for the cruisers, meant that those guns, A, couldn't be used properly by the destroyers, and B, when they did fire, would often cause other issues for the ship. So, yeah. It's a fun thing. 9681. Why aren't the Sprint's classes guided missile destroyers as they have the DD Pennant? That's a debate within the US Navy. That is a debate within the US Navy. Arguments before that's all really finalised, so they're left as they were, because again, they're kind of the older ones, and no one's really too bothered about them. They're not a Burke, basically, at the point at which they're working on those sort of things. Apologies off topic, but can you shoot me a recommendation for either turret designs or general ship electrical drawings? You'll find that both of those actually in my book. General ship electrical drawings... There is actually a book which is entitled something like Ships Electrics. I will track it down. I have a copy somewhere. And turret designs, that would have been my dad's book, which he was working on when one of his 2 books which he worked on when he died. I'll see if I can find it. I do have plans at some point to try and finish them off, but honestly, it hasn't been something I've been wanting to go and reopen up all that stuff. I know he's gone a few years, but I just haven't got round to it. There was a while where I was hoping that, maybe if I was lucky enough to have kids, I'd pass that on to the kids to finish off their granddad's work. But, no. I don't know. Haven't been lucky on that front, so, we'll see. I'll work on that one. What would the impact have been of the Spruance using a Mark 26 GMS with 2 standard limiters instead of the historical ASRock Grim 7 combo? Would have made them far more flexible, but possibly would have made them a better candidate for NTU upgrade. Maybe would have given them a better candidate for an Aegis upgrade. Could have made them longer lasting and service and more flexible, but they didn't. They went down the route they did of the capabilities they had. Stafford, what would an RCN destroyer look like? Be vintage 1918, as we were commissioning the Halifax frigates at the time, and the Iroquois were a mid-life extension. You'd probably be looking at something which is a large Halifax. Basically, take a Halifax and enlarge it. The Halifax are quite big frigates, actually. They are really quite big frigates. They're nice, but they are quite big. But if you start looking at them and you start going, well, hang on, if we expanded that, what do we do? If you added Aegis or something onto it, and if you went for, probably considering their timing, it would be Aegis you'd be going for. You probably would be going for something which was a Burkeized Halifax class. And you would probably be looking at, well, Mark 41 VLS system, because they've got the Mark 48 VLS system, which is for Evolved Sea Sparrow. So probably you would go, okay, right then. So we need something like, if it was the Canadian Navy at the time, probably considering that they literally have 16 Sea Sparrows on the Halifax, you probably get them have 48 Mark 41 VLS cells or something like that, if you're lucky. And it would be a Burkeized Halifax class is what you'd get. So probably something which is going up to about 6,000 to 8,000 tons. Oh, good lord. Stafford. The big problem with that whole thing is I'd have to actually be looking. And I've got a house which is requiring a lot of time. I've got a lot of work going on. And frankly, I don't seem to be good. I don't seem to be good for things like online dating. I think, judging from what my friends say, my natural inclination to be verbose and to talk a lot does not help me, if I'm being honest. But that's life. We're not all good at everything. We can't be. We're human. And maybe not. Who knows? Perhaps in my travels I'll meet someone. The amount of people who are going a stretch expanded Halifax with Mark 41 VLS and Aegis would be cursed. It'd be cursed, but it'd be cursed in such a sexy way. Let's be honest. And judging by current Canadian warships, by the way, I have met something which is the scariest Canadian senior officer you can put in charge of a warship. It's a very nice lady, one of the ones I met while I was wandering around Halifax at one point, and she's now in charge. I think she is now in charge of a warship. That we met a few members of the Royal Canadian Navy while we were in Canada years ago, and I think the lady who was in command of the base next to Haida has now moved on and is doing other things, but she was really good. One of the ones we met, who was, I think, only a lieutenant at the time, but is now much more senior rank in the Canadian Navy, was at the time a short redhead. And I watched her drive while we were in Halifax, and she was exactly like we diagnosed, very polite outside the car, put her inside a steel box, incredibly aggressive driver. And yeah, she's now in charge of one of the Canadian ships, I think, from judging from her posts. And yeah, if she handles a warship like she handles her car, Lord help anyone who ever tries to fight her. Lord help them. She would have been suitable for HMS Gurkha, let alone Haida and Huron. She'd have been suitable for Gurkha. Charge and air attack? Yes, I'm on it. Sadu, another Why are you going for Yandir ship girls, Sadu? That's worrying. Although, and this is the joke which has been lasted with the ship-shaped crew since we left Japan, is that at least one of our colleagues, not me, spent a large chunk of his time in Japan hunting ship girls. He came professing not to be interested at all, but then he started finding ones which were associated with ships he was actually interested in, and suddenly he wanted to have those girls in terms of their drawings with their ships, because he thought that was a cool thing for the ships, and because they represented the personality of the ship he felt so well. So yeah. No, 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 no. Yeah. uh, yes, it was. Yeah, it was. It's the amazing thing. It's like nicest way. The road from Toronto to Hamilton was an experience for me. That was an experience. That used every bit of driver training I've ever had in my life to survive, because you had traffic joining from both sides of the road, and you're sort of going, I'm on a 6-lane road. There's 6-lane. It's traffic coming from everywhere. It's this lane is this specialist, this lane is this specialist. There are people just lurching straight off. No one's indicating. All I can tell you this is, after driving that road, A, I felt like a better driver, and B, and this was probably more important, B, I realised where all the training that the Canadians ever needed in destroyer tactics for World War II came from, probably on that road. Answer that one. Okay, any merit to the idea that a modern destroyer needs a higher strategic speed mobility than a high tactical speed? I would say potentially yes. They do need the strategic speed does help. The higher cruising speed. I am starting to come very much on the idea of, we need to have ships which have both a cruising speed and a super cruise. Super cruise is coming to aircraft recently, and I think you need a super cruise for ships as well. I think you need to have a sort of 2 points of efficient maneuver travel, and it's something you can do with the integrated electric systems and the propulsion systems, because you can go, right then I will turn on what, maybe I can move, how fast can I go on one gas turbine, how fast can I go on two, how fast can I go on three, sort of thing. A scenario you can do of how much power can I put into these engines? Can I design engines to take the full amount of power? But it's a worthwhile thing. Yeah. Generally Panda, hello. What do you think about Bro Munro's idea of going back to Napoleonic ship class systems such as first rate or second rate, ship based on number of VLSs? It's something which actually we experimented a lot with in bilge pumps. We talked about a lot. The trouble comes into that not all cells are the same. And it used to be okay, fine, if you pierce for a number of guns, you could also work out how big a guns you're going to have. But you could have a ship which has 16 strategic length cells on it for some reason. Some of them actually do. And another ship which has 48 cells on them, but they're only tactical length. And suddenly, okay, well, how do we rate these as a comparison? Because it's basically the equivalent of, one of the ships is carrying, I don't know, 64 pounders. And one of them's carrying 18 pounders. Or let's go to be nice. Let's say one of them's carrying 16 32 pounders and one of them's carrying 64 18 pounders. Okay. Let's think about that. Which one's actually the more powerful ship? Which one's the one you don't want to get in a fight with? And if you want to go for VLSLs by mass, well, that depends on what you're loading them with. So, yeah. It's an idea, it's a starting point which you have to start to consider. I'm almost tempted to say you want to break it down even more. Go first rate destroyer, first rate frigate, those sort of things. But because that way you could actually work it through, arguably. But it would take a lot of working out, and then people would wreck it very quickly. Because everyone would be building to the system, not building to the capability. Stafford, is the Trump class the Defiant going to go down as a modern era's Tillman, and will it cause the SN to reinvest in proper somewhat DG with Berg weapons like they should have done? I doubt. I don't know if the latter will happen. I have no idea about the Trump class. I really don't. It's going to depend who comes after him. It is. It's going to depend who comes after him, what they want to pursue. And I was having this conversation today. I've had this conversation a few times with you all recently. It's the changeover, it's the dithering, it's the indecision, it's to keep changing your minds that causes the problems in shipbuilding and warship construction. The trouble is ships take so long to build and develop. You're talking about 10 years before the ship hits the water. You could be talking 20 to 25 years before the final ship's finished. And in that time, you'll get so many changes of government, so many different people with different ideas coming in. Things just go nuts. Okay, Bandholm, what do you think of the new Canadian destroyer based on Type 26? Personally, I'm a bit surprised and somewhat disappointed that they only have 30 VLS cells. That is an interesting interesting issue to have. Let's be honest, compared to the Halifax, they still have a lot more VLS, and that's if you consider the Halifax the baseline, and they had 16 cells. It's a lot better. Now, at the moment, they have 24 cells Mark 41 VLS, which is going to be quad packed with ESSMs and SM2s and Tomahawks. It's going to have some of those in it. Now, this is at the moment. It's also got the ability to carry 8 naval strike missiles in 2 quad launchers. And it's going to have rolling airframe systems. Now, would I like them to be carrying more? Yes. Are they going to get? Is that probably going to change things? Probably not, because one of the things that you have to realise with what the Canadians are pushing for is the Canadians are basically pushing for a destroyerized frigate. In many ways, they're searching for a modern tribal class, something which is the smaller level of the warship, the fully capable warship. But is the most powerful variant of it. And that's kind of what they've gone with. Would I like it to have more? Yes. Do I think they're going to modify it to have more? No. But again, I do keep pointing out the BAE designs have a split down the middle where they are designed to be divided in half and bits added in. Literally, if you want to add in some more cells, you can literally do that. You can do that at any point in the design and construction process if you're smart and fast enough. But to do that is going to cause the design process and building process to be paused. So I would say it's got to be part of a batch system. And if the idea is to buy 15 ships, I would wait till I would probably get 8 in service before you start trying to muck around with the following ones. Because otherwise you might not get any in service if you're anything like the Royal Navy, which the moment they start mucking around them, you stop getting things in service quickly because it takes forever for everyone to be happy with it. Because once one person's had a bright idea, lots of other people have a bright idea, and lots of ideas need to be either disproved or included. Oh, Stafford, everyone went for the small hull, and they basically adapted the small hull, and I don't think anyone's actually probably gone for the medium hull. Everyone's gone for variations of the small hull. It's really not that big a difference between all of them. No one went for the large hull design. Because, again, it'd be very easy to make the design. You're already making all the other bits. You're just adding a bit in the middle. The trouble is with doing a later on upgrade once a ship started to wear, is once a ship's in service, if you, as cruise ships will tell you, if you cut them in half and then add something in the middle, then that's more difficult, as you're going to have bits wearing at different points in their age group. You're going to have to do far more work on their hulls, etc., to standardize it out. Whereas if you do it when it's in the design process, when you do it in the building, it's seamless. So realistically, if you want to do it at any point, you want to do it in the construction phase. But as said, once you pause construction to do these kind of things, you get problems. Whereas, in the nicest way, if you are going to build 15, 16, that is enough time that someone's going to probably want to do it anyway. And you can maybe co-opt their idea to increase it. They are now trying to claim they went for the medium one. Okay, they are trying to claim, but I've looked in. I've got since I've had the video about it and people talking about it and everything. I've gone and looked into it, and literally, what they've done is they've sort of stretched the small one a bit. They haven't actually got to the full medium one. The full medium one would have been okay. Because I also thought the Australian was the medium one. Because originally I thought the Australians were supposed to be the bigger, were supposed to be the longest, but they've all increased to roughly about the same length. The Hunters are 151.4 meters. The Cities are 149.9 meters, and the Rivers are 151.4 meters. So basically, the difference in length between the Hunter class and the Hunters and Rivers on one side and the City class is 1.5 meters. 1.5 meters, okay? To be more technical, or different, given it to Imperial, the difference is just under 5 foot. Because they've gone from 491 foot 10 inches to 496 foot 9 inches. So it's just under 5 foot. So it is a slightly stretched version of the small hull. Okay? So when someone turns around, and I also, because they're making such a big fuss about them being longer before they release their lengths, I thought they'd gone for the medium length, which would have been, I think it was an extra something like 20 foot of differences between them. It goes up to eventually to something which is actually longer than Type 45, but they didn't go there. Because you see, a Type 45 is 500 foot. A Type 45 is 152.4 meters. Again, the Type 45s are about a meter longer than the Hunter and River class. So, this is not a massive difference. When people tell you they've got the larger Type 26s, they are making a big deal over less different. Let's put it this way: it is less length difference than me laying down. If I laid down on a plank of wood off the end of a British Type 26, I could peer in front of the others. Oh, and by the way, the bit which in the middle, which can descend, is not the British government. It's BAE which started standardising it. The reason why BAE started standardising it is it's a selling point that they used to sell to the British government. The British government then goes, well, we've now got this option for the future. And the other ones go, we've got this option for the future. We can add in a middle section. I'm not sure if any of them are actually going to do it. But they've got it, so they can claim they have it. It's all designed. There's a whole lot of extra money that the BAE probably did charge for the design work to make sure that this ship can be literally divided down the middle, without it in fact impacting systems, and without it being expensive. But, you know, that's the way life goes. They're all about the same speed. Honestly, considering the engines and systems are pretty much the same, the odds are that the length to beam ratio of the Hunters and Rivers will give them a slight edge, but it won't be much enough to worry about it. Oh, Night Zero everyone. Yeah, how much of a decision to reuse Type 23 VLS wasn't for? Yeah, why has this popped in? I have no idea. Get rid of that. That makes more sense. Sorry, I must have clicked something and not realised I'd clicked it. How much decision to reuse Type 23 VLS wasn't thought up just in case the Mark 41 VLS supply got cut off? No, it wasn't. It was literally a knee-jerk reaction. We have these VLS cells, let's add them in. No one sensible would have actually, if anyone was thinking long term, would have actually done it. Because honestly, you could have ordered a Mark 41 VLS and got it fairly quickly at the time when the decision was made. Night, they're not fitting them with 32 cells, they're fitting them with 24. So they're not fitting them with 32 cell system, they're fitting them with 24 cells from it. Yes, Stafford, they would. That would. Regan Blender, what's the view on the Sijon the Great class in upcoming new KDX? The Koreans are doing a nice job. They are producing some really interesting ships, and they're really quite capable. Again, the reason I tend to lean towards the Mayor is quite simple because, honestly, the Mayor is probably less of a complicated thing of so many different systems to maintain. But there again, the Sejong the Greats have a really lot of firepower. There is an argument with the Sejong the Greats, though, whether or not they wander into cruiser territory with their level of firepower, because the full loaded ones are 12,000 tons. They are 170 meters or 166 meters, so they are up to 557 foot 9 inches for the batch 2s. The batch 2s have a 48 cell Mark 41 VLS for their air defense missiles, a 16 cell K VLS for Korean ASROC and Korean SAMs and various Korean SAM systems, and another 24 cell K VLS 2 for their long range SAM and their Hinmo ballistic missile systems, which means they are technically carrying 88 cells plus their 8 anti-ship missiles. However, the first of the batch carried what was it? It was 128 VLS cells plus 16 anti-ship missiles. That's batch 1. So they were walking around taking 144 missiles on them wherever they went. That's before they start quad packing everything. They were really, yeah. The Sejong the Greats really do borderline on are they cruisers or are they destroyers? They're basically Arleigh Burke's gone. Yeah, we can add stuff into these. But yeah, the batch 2s dropped a lot of VLS capability, but they have dropped that VLS capability in being able to take of the Hunmo, which is their ballistic missile, let's call it, strike missile system. And if you look up the Hunmo and the latest variants of it, you'll look it up and go, okay, so when people talk about other people fitting these things to their ships and how dangerous this can be, the Koreans are already there. They've already got a missile which has a 3,000-kilometer range, displaces 36 tons, carries a payload of 8 tons, and yeah. Basically, please look up the Hyunmo. I've got to do at some point. I'm going to do a key ships on the Sejong the Great class and talk through their systems because they are useful and interesting and ever so slightly intimidating. Other nations talk about fitting these things. The Koreans don't talk; they just do. Is a crew increase more of a time crunch or a physical crunch up front? Crew increase is more of a timed crunch for training, but also, again, it's over massive. If you think about it, if it's for 2 ships, you've got to have 4 or 5 extra people, that's quite a small number. But it is a training thing, and a training cycle you've got to figure out of training people for those capabilities. Whereas if you're talking for a larger force, it's easier to justify those extra training and extra numbers, but it's a lot more extra people. So if it's 22 ships and it's an extra 10 crew, that's an extra 220 people. But it's far easier to justify the training, etc., for producing 220 people. But there again, if it's something like weapons technicians or something, you tend to just add that into your already produced training systems. Paul Amos, given the spear and shield aspect destroyers, what do you consider the minimum number of ships they need to do the job of protecting the fleet and protecting trade routes such as Strait from us? Who are you and what you're doing, basically? If I wonder, let's put it this way: what am I doing? What fleet am I protecting, and what ships am I doing? I would argue that once you're getting down to a force of less than 12, you're getting into trouble on pretty much anything. If you're actually trying to be a global a navy which can project its power, because with 12, if you're at worst, you're doing three sets of 4 as your force generation. The likelihood is you with 12, you're going to have 6 available at any one point. But also the thing is, once you've got a certain number of 12, you've got 4 operational. So if you've got a carrier battle group, that's 2 available and 2 available for other missions. So including one sitting in the Strait of Hormuz, if you want to have something like that. And that's the reality. That's why Britain originally wanted 12 Type 45s. But again, it's how do you build these ships? Do you build what kind of flexibility do you build into them? What kind of capabilities do you want to build into them? So, what kind of destroyer carries ballistic missiles? The Sejong the Great. But, it's a case of what do you want to do? I've been having this conversation a lot recently with the current state British people. People keep asking me, what kind of size does the Royal Navy need to be? And realistically, if I was getting my dream force at the moment that I could implement with what we've got going on, it would be 12 Type 26s, 12 Type 31s or 32s, whatever they are, in terms of light frigates, and I would want to start the Type 83s as soon as I could, and not start replacing the Type 45s till I got to 6 Type 83s, and then when the 7th Type 83 comes into service, that replaces one of the Type 45s and so on from that. So you grow up the fleet to about 36 escorts. If we consider SDR 1998 put it at a requirement of about 35 ships, and then it's been dropping ever since, 32, 35. I'm reckoning 36 is not a bad number. Because again, if you're 36 and if there's pools of 12, then you're usually looking at going to have an availability of guaranteed readiness of 2 frigates and 2 destroyers for a carrier battle group. You're going to have 2 more frigates and 2 more destroyers for other things, including the local patrol ship for the UK. You're going to have the Type 31s being deployed around the world and doing what they need to be around the world, the 4 of them. And if they're forward deployed, that's even better. You could have 8 forward deployed in pairs, 4 pairs around the world, and 4 sitting back at home for when it's major maintenance and refitting them. You don't want to keep, churning out sort of lots of different ships. And again, the whole idea, usually when people sort of start going, oh, we want 24 Type 31s, why do you want 24 Type 31s? It's because they're cheap, usually. Well, the moment you start adding systems to make it viable to build 24 of them, because the moment they are, let's be honest, as they're being designed, they're being very much designed as light frigates. Very much designed as light frigates, and very much capability, they're going to start getting more expensive. They're going to require more crew, they're going to require more support, more infrastructure. They're going to be more complicated and longer to build. So all those things you want for them don't make it. The moment you start adding stuff onto them, doesn't make them any easier or quicker to build. So realistically, we've got a complicated frigate program. It's called a Type 26. It just needs to be funded properly, and we need to stop giving away design slots to people and construction slots to people. And the Type 31 is going to be a great force multiplier. The thing I'm worried about is it's going to be used to replace the OPVs and not going to be able to do the frigate job. And realistically, you need the OPVs as well. You need about 12 of them. And I would want about 12 minesweeper vessels as well. And so that would be my full structure. About 24 minesweepers and OPVs, 12 each. And then the 12 light frigates are doing patrol, presence, and flak frigate duties and providing at least one with the carrier battle group. And to provide the flak frigate protection for the carrier. And then the carrier will be built around 1 Type 31, 2 Type 26s, and 2 Type 45s or 2 Type 83s. But the thing is, you're going to be short destroyers until you start putting those in the Type 83s. And again, one of the popular things I've seen a lot of people going is, well, we could adapt the Type 31 to being an air defense destroyer. You can do. Good luck, that's going to be expensive. It's not going to be a cheap frigate anymore. Once you're putting in on the computer systems, all the power generation systems, all the sensors, and all the VLS cells, and everything else you need to put in to turn it into an air defense ship, it is not going to be your cheap, quick-to-build frigate anymore. It is going to go from 250 million, 300 million pounds a hull to 800 million pounds a hull, if you're not more. Plus, there's going to be the research and development program to implement it. The point that I get into trouble with is with a lot of people and a lot of when I'm occasionally asked to discuss it with the media, etc., is that the quick fix solutions which people talk about are not quick and they're not solutions. They're options, they are, but they're not going to be quick. Type 31s are, broadly speaking, sloops. They're not corvettes, they are better armed than that, but they're sloops. Things that are interesting to me. What is the chance that Type 83 just becomes a 96 cell Type 26 that's going around? Unlikely. Because as lovely as it is an idea, and I've had this conversation, the trouble is, it's not enough cells for the future operations. And it's not enough for the requirements of what they want to do. It's not going to be enough capability. There is certainly a potential of it, but it's not going to be. Also, think about when we're going to do it. At the moment, the Type 26 is hot stuff. It really is. I'm not saying it's not. Okay? But the earliest we are going to start building in the UK, the Type 83, the earliest we're going to start building it is going to be when the last of the Royal Navy class, after the last of them are launched, right? We don't know when London and Edinburgh are going to be laid down, let alone when they're going to be launched. But the average ship is taking about 5 years to go from launching to laying down to launching. They can usually have about 2 undergo at any one point. They were laid down 2017, 2019, 2021, and 2023. Sheffield was laid down in 2024. Newcastle was supposed to be laid down in 2025. London and Edinburgh, who knows when they're going to be laid down. Okay? Potentially they're laid down 2026, 2027, potentially they get pushed around because of the Norwegian orders. So let's say they don't get laid down till 2029. 5 years. So we're not going to be talking about... The earliest we could be laying down a Type 83 is 2034. That's 8 years from now. That's a lot of naval architecture development to take place. A lot of design studies to take place. A lot of development to take place. It's not going to be a modified Type 26 by that point. It's going to be something different. And there's also the fact that that 96 cell system doesn't include hypersonics, which are possibly going to come into service by then. We're already involved in 3 programs developing those. It doesn't include concepts for lasers in that system, in terms of beyond basic ones. Doesn't include any power generation for railguns, which, by the point we're talking about, considering the pace of the Japanese program and the Americans now pushing forward into their program again, might actually be something we're having to think about. And then there's the drone systems which can be added in, and the other systems which can be added in. The point is, the Type 26 is a very good design to be built now, and it'll be modified and refined for the next 20 years. But would I be building it in 10 years' time? Probably not. And, yeah. So, but I thought you said the future sloops are going to be uncrewed vessels. They probably are. But that doesn't. That's the ships that are going to be called sloops are going to be uncrewed assets. But the Type 31, broadly speaking, fits more in the sloop category than it does in the frigate category. In terms of its capabilities and in terms of what its operation is supposed to do. The Italians did design some Polaris tubes onto their ships. I think it was cruisers. From memory. Mr. Banham, do you think Royal Navy will go more towards US systems or pivot to Europe? I think there are more missiles and particular guns like the 5-inch ODS. I think the British are going to keep charting course in between and building their own. And one of the things I'm really not about is we're not involved in the Aquila system. I think we should be involved in the Aquila system. But the reason I think we're probably not is because we haven't gone down the strategic length cells for our Type 45s, and so we can't really upgrade to it. But the Aquila is basically, there was the Asta Block 2 BMD, I think it was, or something, which was going to be the ballistic missile defense system, and that's basically been evolved into the Aquila program, and we haven't gone down that route. It's a fun times. It's a fun times. Petchington, but what can Type 31s do if you have that many of them? What can they provide? And by the way, do they only have 100 crew once you start fitting Mark 41 VLS and the other systems into them, which are more crew intensive and require more crew to watch them and maintain them? The Iron's gone down the 5-inch gun from the US 5-inch at the moment. That's what we've gone down with. But we'll see. Sadu, what do you think of combined gas and gas? I think it's an interesting idea. You have different gas turbines, gas turbine systems which are used for generating power, and gas turbines which are generated for generating direct drive sort of system, or sometimes for power in terms of providing motive power. I think probably integrated electric system is probably where you go, rather than having gas and gas. I think gas and gas is going to be one of those things which turns up as an interesting idea, but it isn't pursued long term because there's a better system coming up. It's one of those things which were, if it had been thought of about 30 years earlier and used 30 years earlier, it would be dominant by now. But I think in trouble is it's coming in at a point when there's other options which could be more efficient for future, better for future systems like lasers and railguns and those systems. To mention, yes, the Poles do manage all sorts of things with their Type 31s, but they're not building a Type 31. They are, well, it's called a Type 31, but it's actually an Arrowhead 140 with their Polish modified designs, and they've got those systems in. They're doing great, but again, what do they expect of them versus what the British expect of them? Where are they deploying them? How long term are their deployments? Again, every nation uses their ships slightly differently. Even if they're operating the same area and they're operating the same ships, they're going to have a slightly different tempo, different style of operations, reflecting their national needs. And I'm not poo-pooing your idea here. I'm just saying, okay, yes, you get 24 Type 31s. Great. What do they do for you? What are they really useful for? Are they going to provide even premier air defense capability? Are they going to provide even submarine capability? Mine hunting capability? Or are they just basically good present ships and flak frigates? They are good present ships and flak frigates, but can the Royal Navy afford to run 24 ships just for those roles? Are you going to use them to replace all your OPVs and all your mine hunters? Which you can do. You could do that with the Type 31s and their follow-ons. You could do that. That's a perfectly reasonable idea to put forward. But if you are doing that, then you've got to be prepared for the fact that they're going to cost a lot more to operate than an OPV. Because you're comparing them now, they're no longer fulfilling the role of, filling in for the escorts, which you're comparing with 100 crew compared to a couple of hundred crew or less. You're now comparing them to the OPVs, and let's be honest, the River class. I'm just going to check this one for the batch freeze for their crew numbers, because I don't think they're that many. Their crew comes in at about 34 to 50. So, for what you're asking to do, is it better to have a batch-free River class with upgrading it with an Otto Malaria 76 and a 40mm or something like that? If you just want it for presence and wandering around. What are you using those Type 31s for? Are they being used as missile trucks? Are they basically going to be integrated into the Type 45s and providing which provide the air defense weapons and sensors, and then they just provide the missiles which the Type 45 then fires remotely? You can do that, but again, you've got to pay and set that system up. You've got to make sure that research and development that's going to work under all circumstances. And basically, therefore, you're paying for an extra ship to wander around and basically be a missile truck. Which is, again, it's a perfectly reasonable argument to make and logical. But you've got to think that through and go, okay, is this a sensible course for us to do, funding-wise? And any changes you make, like saying I want to put 64 VLS, I want to put 3-inch guns, anything else, that's going to add cost to change it round to put those things in. You're not buying the Type 31 we're currently building. You're going to be buying a changed, modified design. It's not going to be the same price. Batch 2 OPVs, they have the ability to take containers on them, but they can sit on a deck rather than in a mission bay. They don't have a multi-mission bay, but they have the ability to take containers on the deck. And again, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to justify it, but you have to have a good reason better than, I want to have more of this for this. You have to have an argument which is going to make the case not just with the British public, but with funding, and just going, okay, 24. I agree with you. Type 31 is far better than OPV. But the question is, can I justify it economically and sensibly for Britain to be making that case? And also, if I'm thinking in building 24 Type 31s, what else am I going to get the funding? Where am I going to get the funding from to do that? And remember, as I was spoken earlier, I was going, well, I'd like 12 Type 31s or 32, Type 31 and 32s, and I would like 12 OPVs and 12 MCMVs. So actually, was talking about 36 ships for different roles. Loudwood, self-defense suites. Do lasers, missile systems replace or assist in the kinetic theorists utilizing air defense? I would say they insist and you complement, you build it into it. I would say once you're onto the scenario of going, I'm going to replace this, I would go, well, why are you doing that? Until you're very sure the lasers will provide the same flexibility in all weathers and all scenarios in terms of working, and they are going to be first generation systems to be deployed, I would not be doing replacements. This might be me being overly cautious, but again, I would go, these are multi-billion pound, hundreds of million pound assets to build. Am I going to really, if I'm going to put in a close-in weapon system, does it really cost me that much more to just, as a bit of reassurance, to make sure I have both I have the old system and the new system until I'm very, very sure about new systems? And again, as I said, I would say the minimum you should have of each system would be free. But that's me because I'm overly cautious. And so it would be great to have some Type 31s configured as heavy weapons trucks. It would be to to basically carrying a whole load of VLS cells and basically supporting the task group, and by being the missile truck in the task group. That'd be useful. But you're going to have to get them built and ordered. And currently, we haven't even ordered batch 2 Type 31s yet. And they keep talking about our production facilities being used to produce other people's ships, so that means they might not be free to produce the ones for us. Sounded like with the Type 26, where they're selling off the production slots for the to Norwegians, on the idea the Norwegians will always turn up when the British want them to assist them. Ay, caramba. So you could use the way you hand for cannons, a categorization vertical launch cells by mass. To an extent, we do that. There is a system which is not very popular because it's massively complicated. It's a huge table, which basically has the ships categorized in, and they have the 4 types of cell length, which basically goes up to strike, and then there's tactical, and there's the point. There's the smallest, I think, is point defense from memory. And not all VLS systems have 4 levels, but some of them do. And so you categorize the ships going through it by going through how many strike length cells they have, how many The trouble is, and this is the point, is during the age of canon, there was a level of standardization going on between the canon, between nations. These days, there is not even a level of standardization in terms of what defines a strike length versus... We all know a strike length is the biggest ones, but the strike length cells of the silver variety are shorter than the strike length cells on the Mark 41 variety. And are shorter still than, I think, the Korean ones. The Chinese ones fit in between, if I remember correctly from my top of my head. But again, they're changing because they're evolving and building new systems. And that's going to be an interesting video to talk about at some point. I'm going to do key ships on a Chinese destroyer, and I'm going to talk about their VLS system. The lasers currently being fitted on most ships are more of a pilot testing of an idea than they are actually the finalized version of it.
And Minecraft, I thought that's what he meant. That's why hopefully I interpreted it as. You're being very good tonight. YouTube Minecraft Watcher. What would you say would be the limit on the VLS for a destroyer for offensive and defensive purposes? Oh, there's a question. Before you might as well build a cruiser. I'd say currently it's a 64-64. If you got something on those lines, 64 surface-to-air missiles and 64 defense, VLS which are purposed around strike and 64 which are purposed around tactical, then you're about sort of the limits of it. The moment you're up to more than 64 strike length cells, you're starting to look interesting. The moment you're up to over 100 strike length, I would say the Burks are pushing it at 96. They're at the upper end. They were when they were built were at the upper end of destroyers. I'd say that's one of the things which actually does work in the favor of Type 55s in terms of them being destroyers. In that, I think with the realization of the difficulties we have of reloading VLS at sea, magazine depth becomes more important, and because your cells are your magazines, that means numbers matter. And I think if you look at some of the operations that have been fought against the Houthis, and even currently in the Straits of Hormuz and that sort of the Indian Ocean and the Gulf, magazine depth is becoming more and more of an issue. Ships having to return to port to be rearmed. And returning to port is when they're at risk. And anything you can do which gives you more freedom about when you return to port, so you can return to port early, you can return to port later, etc., is useful. And magazine depth is what gives you that freedom. Ethan Yang, to answer that question, that's quite easy. If I point you to the last slide on every video in the Air Destroyer, you will notice there is a long list of ships in here, of classes and things going to be looked at. And if we talk down, we've got a Type 45, Type 45s on the March the 31st. We have the Cold War USN's destroyers. We have all these things going on. But if we wander along, we have interwar Dutch evolution. Yes, on the 21st of April, we have the Dutch Navy. So, yeah. Cam guys, look. Can a Type 45 cams VLS take cam? Yes. They can take cam. They can take the variant of cam we're currently designed for. They can take individuals. They can't quad pack. So that's the Joeltron thing. Is the other thing? This is the annoying thing. Okay. If we were putting in the Mark 41 VLS, we could get the quad pack cam, and we could quite simply use 8 of those cells for 32, be carrying more cam missiles than we currently now have, and have 16 VLS cells for other things. So they could carry Tomahawks, they could carry SM-3 theater ballistic missile defense systems, they could carry Aquila, they could carry all sorts of options. But yeah. You meant CAM-ER. I don't think the cells can take CAM-ER, but they don't need to. They've got ASTA. CAM-ER is a great system for a ship which only has CAM. If you have ASTA, you don't need CAM-ER. You need CAM, because that's your point defense. Basically, the Type 45s, the CAM is replacing the ASTA 15, so they can carry more ASTA 30s. So basically, instead of them carrying a mixture of ASTA 15s and ASTA 30s, they are going to be carrying all ASTA 30s in their 48 cells. And the CAM will take the role of the ASTA 15. Answer that one. Mr. Banholm, in your opinion, should the European nations that are focused on they build more destroyers rather than focus on so many different frig classes? Look, I think you need both. You need the frigates for ASW work. You need the defensive capability, and you need them to extend for your mass. But you need destroyers as well. In a sensible world, you would have probably a policy of for every destroyer you'd have a couple of frigates. And again, that fits the numbers which I gave earlier as my fleet, which I would build if I was in charge of Britain and in charge of the Royal Navy. That's where I'd start off. I'd also go and fix out the army's funding because, frankly, the shortage of artillery is terrible. The land-based air defense is atrocious. There are so many different issues for Britain. Its defense, it's annoying and absurd. But all these things, one of the problems with them is, okay, it's not so much a conspiracy theory as it's a never-ending of not wanting to make a decision and pushing it down the road. That's where we're at. And not investing enough in infrastructure. I know I sound like a broken record. I do like to talk about infrastructure. But life happens. And we are where we are. And we can fix it. The whole of Europe can fix it. There are various issues. But all nations have issues. The thing about the US Navy and a lot of the big those sort of navies is their size tends to cover up some of their issues, which is good. It's what size to get mass gives you the advantage of. But you still have issues. It's really fun. I was watching Ryan Macbeth the other day, and he was talking about littoral combat ship and going, it'd be really useful to have for the Straits of Hormuz and things they're doing. It would be if the littoral combat ship had been designed properly as it was to fit its doctrine idea, its idea and its things, instead of them being obsessed with basically making it a speedboat with missiles and forgetting things like anodes, etc., which have meant that the real reason for the problems with a lot of the LCS has come down to hull life and hull stress issues and strain issues, and that's the problem with them. The concept having something to ship to find in littorals is quite useful for certain circumstances like they're currently facing. The problem was, especially the earlier ones, suffered from this more than the later ones because they'd had some of these things fixed. What they'd built them as and what they'd been built to, they were supposed to be, was different things. Stafford, will the Royal Navy be looking at Zumwalt Holstar for the Type 3? We'll see what comes about. It's a long way ahead. In the nicest way, ooh. If we do a straight jump, the earliest is probably going to be some point in the early 2030s, right? A straight jump from Type 26 production to Type 83. And if you consider there's probably going to be a configuration of tooling, so that could well add 2 years onto that scenario as well. If we could be talking 2036 before they actually get laid down, which means we are probably about 5 years and at least one government in the UK, probably if you consider the recent indications as an example, away from actually having to make a decision. We'll see what's happened in the world, and we'll see what the government's willing to fork out. But I'm very worried that someone's going to say that uncrewed assets can replace crewed assets in presence and command and control. And I wouldn't be surprised. There's all sorts of silly ideas going forward. Oh, actually, no. Someone was actually going the idea of, well, what happens if we have the VLS cells be in another hull, and the sensors in one hull in command and control, and we basically rotate out the uncrewed hulls which have the missiles. And I was listening to that and thinking, Okay, so who's escorting the uncrewed assets back? But no, 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 don't worry. They were going to self-control themselves in and out of the war zone to the ship. So what happens if a submarine sitting somewhere outside the war zone going, oh, VLS tubes going past, let's sink that hull. It's got no escort, not got no people with it. Nothing. It's a great idea until you actually start thinking about the reality of it, and then you go, no, that's probably not a sensible option. You probably need to have something to escort them in and out, and make sure they get there. Take care, KVD. I know, what historical hull a destroyer hull was best suited to a DDH derivative, and what's a CVL derivative? Basically anything big. If you want to make a helicopter destroyer, you need something which is going to be a big hull. So probably you're dealing with some of the later vessels. That's the real... Type 82 was quite a good one, actually, for it. Surprising if you look at it. Some of the Soviet ones were fatter, which was also quite useful. Broader beam, I should say. Broader beam. Stafford, what will it take for the Ascend to finally move on from the Burke platform? No and no. My stuff today discussion was entirely about the Royal Navy and its current situations, and for the USN to move on from the Burke platform, they'll have to get a Congress which is willing to take a leap into the dark. Sadu, what do you think the replacement for the Mark 41 vertical launch system will look like? The Mark 41 VLS system, literally, it's been through so many changes, it's just evolved Mark 41. The 53, I think, which is the version which is put around the decks of the ship, is actually slightly longer and slightly better in some ways, but yeah, they've gone back to Mark 41, so, you know, these things happen. Good boy. Ethan Yang, I've answered that one. Steve Clarke, missile range altitude. The publicized stats we know are fiction, but what fiction do the salesmen say about engagement windows? Usually it comes down to they're presenting targets which are, and most of the sales, and this is one of the troubles, is most of the sales are about targets, about weapons coming towards you as a ship, which gives you quite a long engagement window, whereas if the target's going across, it's a shorter engagement window. If the target's not coming for you, there's a problem. This is one of the advantages of a task group in defending itself versus a ship in terms of defending a land target. If a task group, then the missiles are, broadly speaking, even if they're coming towards other ships in the task group, they're going to be, broadly speaking, coming towards you, which makes your solutions and fire and control solutions a lot easier than if they are going across you and across your area of control. But we are talking usually seconds rather than hours. Oh, I did talk about the Spruance class. But why weren't they exported? The Spruance is, I think, honestly, no one wanted. They just didn't come out at the time which anyone wanted them. I think that's the trouble. The Spruance class, to an extent, the kids were an export version of the Spruances, and they were originally built for the Iranians, I think, if I remember correctly, Shah Iran. But then they are not, you know, they are then procured because Iran flips government. And I don't think anyone else really wanted a Spruance at the time. That's the trouble. The Charles F. Adams had got quite a lot of foreign export orders. You know, both the Germans and Australians had built them, and a few others had built various things similar to them. So, yeah, that's basically it's a timing issue. Sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Right. With that being said, questions are closed. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. As said, I'm not going to be on Discord because, frankly, my eyes are still going a bit because of all the flashing lights I've had today. I was helping Fred Electrics and sort out things, and lights just kept being flashed in my eyes.
and it's making them still go. I had hoped I got better as the video went on. I think as live went on, I started keeping my eyes were less closed. But I do apologise for that at the beginning. I didn't realise how much it affected my eyes. Fun times. So I probably won't be on Discord, but I will. I probably won't be on Discord, but I will try and pop in if I'm feeling better in a bit. I will try and pop in. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you on Twitch. Thank you on YouTube. Thank you for being here. What have we got coming up? Next week, it's going to be... Well, tomorrow it's going to be Interwar German Resurgence. As said, that one's actually going to be decided tomorrow, what bit's going in that one in the morning. And going to be uploaded tomorrow. And then next week, we've got World War II going for more. The French Navy of World War II. Yes, they're always going for more and more assets. And also next week, what do we have? Also, on Saturday, we have modern merchant cruisers. The roles the ships taken up from trade are built to. And next week we have World War I mutinies in the Royal Navy. That's going to be a fun one. Thank you very much, Ronan. Take care and have fun. Toodles. Okay, Poodle, we'll get you to bed. And if you like the video, please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. See, I did remember. Sal, don't tell me off.